going to start a new series that will eventually lead up to a giant video about all the Fox X-Men movies. I've not come up with a name for it yet, but that does not change the fact that it is a lead up to a giant video about all of the Fox X-Men movies. Previously, I've covered the Fantastic Four movies and the Ghost Rider movies, and this whole thing is leading up to a big, giant video where I talk about all of the Fox X-Men movies. Hi there. Let's talk some Fox. The X-Men, a cornerstone of the extended Marvel Comics franchise and of superhero media in general. Everywhere you go within comic fan spaces, you'll find at least a few folks who love the X-Men. And what's not to love? You've got mutants, superpowers, metaphors for oppression that wildly fluctuate in their efficacy, Wolverine, time travel, soapy relationship drama, black leather, spandex, and so much more. And the movies, well, do they really even need to be introduced? The Fox X-Men movies, for better or for worse, practically created the modern superhero movie. There had been major entries before, from characters like Batman and Superman, but it was the X-Men who really got the ball rolling. And Blade to an extent, but kids weren't watching Blade in theaters. To call yourself a Marvel fan and not have at least a passing familiarity with these movies is inconceivable. Which is why it's so weird that I've never seen any of them. That's right, despite being a fan of Marvel and a movie fan for as long as I can remember, I've never seen an X-Men movie all the way through before. The closest I've come is having seen approximately the last 40 minutes of Days of Future Past when my parents were watching it, which incidentally might actually be the worst possible introduction I could have gotten. I don't know, I guess I've just never really gotten into the X-Men. I always knew of them and I had a peripheral view of their stories, but I was never familiar enough or had enough interest to really consider myself a fan. As mentioned, I never watched any of the movies as a kid, nor did I really watch any of the cartoons, besides maybe an episode or two of X-Men Evolution. The most exposure I had to the X-Men before this year was through the characters in LEGO Marvel Superheroes, which, while a great game I very much enjoyed as a youth, didn't really give me an in-depth look at what was appealing about their stories. However, this year I have been very taken with the recently aired first season of X-Men 97. And with that first season wrapping up, and with the coming release of Deadpool and Wolverine, which seems to be a conclusion of sorts for the Fox X-Men franchise, I figured there was no better time than now to sit down and finally experience the first decades-long cinematic superhero universe. And what an experience it was. Join me as I delve into the X-Men movies. As I started my journey into the X-verse, I was filled with anticipation. X-Men was the one that started it all. The place where not only a whole cinematic universe was first spawned, but also arguably the inception of a whole cinematic genre that would go on to dominate the world and the minds of every movie critic for decades to come. It was a heady venture, and I had no real way to know what to expect. As for the actual movie, it was fine.
This process is slow, normally taking thousands and thousands of years. But every few hundred millennia, evolution leaps forward.
I don't think that's how evolution works at all, actually. X-Men is an interesting look at the genre of superhero movies because so much of it is divorced from superhero and action movie tropes, and yet so much of it is enveloped in it. It takes place in the 2000s, but specifically not the year 2000, rather the not too distant future, which maybe someone should warn them about New York. There's gonna be something happening approximately 1 year, 1 month, and 28 days after this movie's release date. Anyway, this movie's setting is a little bit confusing because it's a world with mutants, but it's kind of trying to imply that rather than being just an alternate timeline that has mutants in it, it's a not too distant future where mutants start popping up all around the world after 9/11, pretty much. This is a bit of a weird take because, as you see in the movie, mutants have definitely been around a lot longer than that. X-Men makes the rather striking choice to start off with Holocaust imagery, showcasing Eric Lenscher, aka a young Magneto, learning of his abilities fairly early on, specifically showing that he really knows how to open gates for people. But with the implication that mutants have just started showing up, how and why did situations like this get covered up? Or maybe I'm just misreading that detail? I don't know. We're in a big old cabinet meeting now.
Ladies and gentlemen, the truth is that mutants are very real, and they are among us.
As a movie about a team of superpowered heroes fighting another team of superpowered villains, X-Men naturally has a wide and fairly star-studded cast. Obviously, we've got Sir Patrick Stewart and Sir Ian McKellen as the old men frenemies of Charles Xavier and Eric Lenscher / Magneto, respectively. But we've also got some fairly big names in other roles, like James Marsden as Scott Summers / Cyclops, and Hal Berry as Aurora Monroe / Storm. I was also certain, and I mean certain, that Sabretooth in this movie was played by Hugo Weaving, but apparently he's not. Like, I don't know why, but I was just convinced that it was him. I had this whole bit drafted up about Sabretooth and Mr. Smith, and it just doesn't make any sense now. I'm pretty sure those are all the big heavy hitters, but I think there's someone I'm missing. Oh, right, duh. Ray Park, the guy who physically plays Darth Maul in all the Star Wars movies, is in this movie as the mutant Toad. How could I forget? The choice to make Toad, of all people, kind of a fuckboy is certainly inspired. Now, you may have gathered from this description that this movie has a lot of characters, and that's kind of true. There are definitely a lot more named characters, and there are certainly a lot of people who are on screen together at any given point. This is a movie allegedly about a team, after all, so it would make sense for members of the team to have screen time. And there are characters who certainly make an impression. I'm not going to be able to get into all of that right now, so just hold on. This movie only really has 4 to 5 actual characters. Charles, Magneto, Rogue, this guy who's really trying to hide his Aussie accent.
You know, you should wear your seatbelt.
Look, kid, I don't need advice on auto.
And maybe Bobby. The rest of the people are more there to pad out the cast of it. Even Jean Grey and Cyclops were just kind of there to be a love interest and romantic rival for Hugh Jackman. Rogue is pretty much the main character here, which, while something I don't really mind, it does feel weird to call this movie X-Men and then just have a bunch of these other characters here to fill seats. That might just be a personal taste thing, though. Damn, that's what you get for kissing before marriage, I guess. The actual plot is fairly interesting, though. The core conceit of the X-Men has always, or as close to always that it doesn't functionally matter whether it is or not, been that mutants are kind of a stand-in for oppressed minority groups. They're a class of people who face discrimination because of factors outside of their control, to such an extent that they are routinely rounded up on the streets and put into camps of some sort. So in this movie, it makes sense that one of the main villains is a Republican. However, the story that they chose to tell has some weird connotations. That's gonna be a theme. Basically, in this movie, Magneto and his Brotherhood of Mutants, which is a name that could have been improved for PR, but is definitely a huge step up from Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, have a plan to kidnap the prominent anti-mutant US Senator Kelly and use this Magneto-powered machine that uses his head to generate a bunch of white stuff. Doesn't surprise me that Charles helped him build it. But it doesn't only do that, it also turns Senator Kelly into a mutant, which manifests itself as, oh dear God, what is that? I don't know if the horror movie level imagery was intentional or not, but it's certainly a way to make an impression. Oh hey, it's Stan Lee. But anyway, Magneto's plan is pretty much just to turn all of humanity into mutants. And the implication there is that it's a kind of, see how this feels, take that kind of situation. Which is understandable, but it relies on mutants being hated and feared as a kind of allegory for oppression. I'll delve into that part later, but if we view Magneto's plan through that same lens, it's kind of weird. Magneto's plan in this movie is kind of like if Killmonger in Black Panther's plan was to shoot a ray into the air that would turn everyone on Earth black. You see how that's kind of weird, right? It doesn't really accomplish anything, and I guarantee you people would find a ways to still be racist to each other. It's just a very harebrained scheme for a character who's presented as an intelligent master manipulator. And of course, he loses any semblance of the moral high ground when he says that he would kill a teenage girl to accomplish this scheme.
Are you going to kill me?
Yes. Your sacrifice will mean our survival. I'll understand if that comes with small consideration.
God, teens are so sensitive these days. They don't even take kindly to being sacrificed for a stupid scheme anymore. Wokeness gone mad, am I right? It also doesn't help that Senator Kelly ended up exploding into watery goop. Gross. Ron DeSantis next. You may have gotten the impression that I don't really like this movie, and that's not true. I actually do quite like it for the most part. It has a bit of a weird early 2000s charm to it, and I like all the performances. The visual effects are kinda hokey. Those claws do not look real, but like a good kind of hokey. There's some really honestly kind of gnarly moments, like Senator Kelly's explosion, that give this a kind of darker edge that most modern Marvel movies don't really capture. I even like Cyclops' stupid ass sunglasses. They're fun. This is an enjoyable movie and I liked watching it. However, there is this kind of attitude that I don't really love. This movie kind of feels like it's ashamed to be a comic book movie, if you know what I mean. There's a kind of self-serious vibe that's most obvious in the now infamous yellow spandex exchange.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
You get it, it's because the comics are stupid. That was pretty bad, but you can almost feel this filmmaker is projecting the same insecurity about how serious the movie is onto most things in the movie. Everyone's so dour, there's so little color in the scenes besides black and dark blue. This movie very much feels like it's trying to be The Matrix in its presentation, and god damn it, this would have been the perfect place to put the Mr. Smith bit if Hugo Weaving was in this movie. God damn it, it was in my clutches. It's this kind of attitude that I think is present in the need to over-explain things. For example, why do Rogue's white streaks of hair need to be explained by Magneto's machine malfunctioning? There's never really been an in-text reason for her hair to be like that besides, I guess, poliosis, which is the actual condition that causes that. That's right, I do some research for these videos. There's also a kind of mocking tone in this movie that's making fun of the more silly aspects. Obviously there's the yellow spandex line, but then there's also stuff like this.
As the others traverse the rigid security.
Why did he walk through the metal detector to begin with? Which, like, to be clear, I'm fine with them poking fun at these tropes, but for some reason it just feels so desperate for an early 2000s audience's approval. Like, it's very much giving, oh guys, we swear we're not that dumb nerd shit, we're cool. It's funny because it's very much the opposite, but somehow the pre-evolutionary stage of the very quippy kind of, so that just happened, humor that Marvel is very criticized for nowadays. But to be fair to the creators of X-Men 2000, they've got some zingers of their own.
You know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
Whoa. Apparently, that line was written by none other than Joss Whedon, who said it was, quote, a brilliant line that would be an all-time classic if it had been delivered with more snark. Sure. Whatever you say, Joss. Haven't you got a female actress you need to make feel unsafe or something? Anyway, I promise I like this movie. It's a really fun time despite the issues I had with it. I only wanted to mention those issues because they do come up in a pretty big way later on. As far as an intro to this franchise goes, X-Men is an incredibly strong start. There is some shaky parts here and there, but overall the ground is solid enough to spring a long-running franchise. 6.5 out of 10, I'd say. The real question is, would they be able to do it again? I mean, yeah, these movies are legendary and came out before I was even born. I'm not even gonna try to create dramatic suspense.
This process is slow, normally taking thousands and thousands of years. But every few hundred millennia, evolution leaps forward.
Still not how that works. X2, X-Men United, has this legendary reputation of being one of the best superhero movies of all time. So many people feel as though it is the cream of the crop in superhero cinema, the standard against which all of these upcoming superhero movies should be held. I don't quite share this opinion of it. It is, however, in many ways, much better than the first one. To begin with, there's a lot of really neat character work being done here. The most immediate thing you'll notice is that there are quite a few new characters who get introduced that add a lot of interesting dynamics to existing characters, and generally make the character work being done a lot more striking. Despite this extended cast, the characters are actually a lot better balanced out than the last movie. Through careful shifting of different character arcs and story beats, X2 X-Men United feels a lot more united. Or at the very least, it feels a lot more like a team-oriented movie. The established characters also feel like there's a lot more attention given to them. Jean, Scott, and the other guy feel a lot more like equal players in this love triangle than they did in the last one. I still don't like this love triangle thing, but whatever, we'll get to it. Charles and Magneto are given a lot more to work with, particularly Magneto, who's just vastly better written and a more consistently solid and motivated character in this one. This is probably the best performance we get from Sir Ian McKellen in these movies, and all he had to do was be an incel for a couple of lines.
Mr. Lorio, never trust a beautiful woman, especially one who's interested in you.
Eric, you gotta stop watching those Manosphere videos. You're getting a skewed vision of women. Xavier is involved in the plot, even if he feels a bit like a damsel in distress most of the time. I guess he just can't be spending all his time freezing people. The first time it was pretty fucked up, but the second time it was okay because it was a bunch of journalists, and everyone knows that journalists aren't really people. It's okay. I can make that joke because I got my degree partially in journalism. Look, I'm immune! But yeah, most of the established characters are given a lot to work with. Even people like Mystique. Even if she and the other women in this movie suffer from some kind of objectifying story beats and her design is still that. Why are her boobs square in the middle of this shot? Magneto's supposed to be giving an important speech. Priorities, guys. She at least has some more complex emotions and motivations to work with. It's a huge improvement. But of course, we have to talk about the new characters. There are a lot to mention, but the most notable to me are Nightcrawler, Pyro, and Stryker. Nightcrawler, played by Alan Cumming of all people, mostly makes an impression on me because he has this badass action scene in the Oval Office at the beginning of the movie, being a prime example of the action that has majorly improved in this movie from the last one. He's also just kind of weird and freaky, but that kind of makes him fun. From what I've gathered from some friends who are more into X lore than I am, he's a pretty inaccurate adaptation of the character from the comics, both in personality and in look. And he's a lot less of the swashbuckling fun guy I know from X-Men 97, and more of a very devout Catholic as his kind of main personality trait. He looks like a demon, but is Catholic. I wonder if there's some symbolism there. But I don't know, he seems like he's kind of got a fun vibe. He's clearly into doing a bit of tattooing for fun, so you know, that's cool.
How many do you have?
One for every sin. So quite a few.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know about that one, actually, Chief. There's also the guy from the Deadpool and Wolverine trailer. Pyro doesn't have a whole lot to do in this movie, but he does bring a kind of new dynamic to the team. He's a bit of an angsty teen mutant who sympathizes with Magneto and serves as a cool rivalry for Iceman/Bobby, giving that character more depth than just being Rogue's love interest, and also adding an interesting layer of a young, oppressed character who sympathizes with the more revolutionary faction. Also, just pairing the ice guy with the fire guy is just begging for conflict and a rivalry in the future. Sure can't wait to see how that goes down in a future movie. And of course, there's Stryker, who... Holy shit, is that Brian Cox?
I was piloting Black Ops missions in the jungles of North Vietnam where you were sucking on your mama's tit at Woodstock, Kelly.
Yep, that's Logan Royal, right?
This was supposed to be choreographed. That's about as choreographed as a dog getting fucked on roller skates.
Stryker is such a powerful presence in this movie, not only because of Cox's performance, but also because he connects thematically to the characters and to the larger conflict. He's a human general, a representative of the establishment, whose hatred for mutants is irrational, but his methods for destroying them are calculated. He specifically uses mutants to destroy other mutants, not only mind-controlling mutants to fight each other, but also doing so with a device powered by mutant abilities. He's got a mutant second in command who he uses to fight other mutants, and his major plan is even to harness Charles Xavier's mutant abilities to literally destroy all other mutants. I said mutants way too much in the last like 15 seconds. He's actively taking the minority signifiers and using them against the minority. He also brings more thematic depth to Jean Valjean by being a major figure in his backstory, making that character so much more intriguing than what we had last movie. Speaking of metal fingers, I already mentioned the Nightcrawler action sequence, but what I said there applies to all of the action in this movie. It's pretty dynamic and fun and has moments like Mystique having a really cool action scene as well. Blue people stay winning. And this guy injecting Stryker's right-hand mutant, who apparently is called Lady Deathstrike, which is just perfect name. Anyway, injecting her with molten adamantium, freezing her in place. Holy fuck, that's metal. Literally. There are some issues, however. The pacing in this movie is a bit off, with the last half hour or so being a little bit of a slog to get through. From my understanding, this movie isn't a great adaptation of the X-Men characters it's about. As mentioned, the female characters aren't great, and the greatest showman is there. However, this was a marked improvement over the last movie, and one that I quite enjoyed. It built upon the foundation of the last movie, fleshed out the characters and their dynamics, and generally just had a more compelling and thematically rich story overall. Easy 7.5 to 8 out of 10. Now, as for the next movie, well...
My dreams are getting worse. Scott. I keep feeling something terrible is about to happen.
You know, I think Jean might have been onto something there. Well, that decayed quickly. Just like X2 before it, X-Men The Last Stand is a movie that has a hell of a reputation behind it. Unlike X2, that reputation isn't so much as a standard to hold all superhero movies against, so much as it is an itemized checklist of what not to do with a comic book movie adaptation. X3, as it's colloquially known, is often at the top of many worst superhero movies of all time lists. A movie so bad that it permanently altered the trajectory of the franchise in ways so irreversible that no filmmaker could ever truly fix, despite how many times they tried. That's something we'll get into a little bit more later. As far as my assessment of the accuracy of that reputation, now that I've actually seen it, yeah, it's pretty spot on. Not gonna dance around it. This movie sucks. It sucks hard. I think that a pretty early sign of how much this movie was going to torture me should have been when it opened on a pretty viscerally horrifying scene of a child trying to cut off his wing stubs.
He ruined my dream journal!
Now, to be fair, this is something I actually do like about this movie. Yes, I'm starting with things I like. I just want to get it out of the way. This kind of dark edge is something that I've already talked about with these movies that I really get a kick out of. There are some pretty fucked up things that happen in these movies that I think add to this strange power that mutants have. Another example in this movie is during the final battle when Storm uses lightning to electrocute this girl and her lip piercing melts. That kind of stuff is metal as shit, even if it makes me wonder about the X-Men's kill count. The acting is also pretty great. There are some excellent performances in this. Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart are, of course, excellent, as is most of the returning cast. Elliot Page is excellent as Kitty Pryde / Shadowcat, though it's pretty hard for him to not be charming, so. Kelsey Grammer is unironically pretty great as Beast in this movie. His performance is enhanced by this really cool practical makeup he's got on. Famke Janssen also gives an excellent and chilling performance as Jean Grey / Phoenix, despite everything else with that storyline. Let's see, Pyro and Bobby have their final showdown, which is cool, I guess. What else is good? What else is good? Oh! I really like it when Juggernaut says this.
I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
That's fun. I'm really struggling to find anything else good here. Let's talk about the bad shit. This movie really knows how to squander its characters. We can start off with some smaller and more literal examples, like how Cyclops, a major character in the first two entries of this trilogy, is killed off immediately, which is just Wow, this guy was done so dirty by this trilogy. He seems really cool based off of what I've seen of him in X-Men 97, but here he's the first guy to die in a horror movie, so that he's eliminated his competition in this stupid-ass love triangle. On that note, said love triangle is so goddamn stupid. Ignoring for a moment the events of this movie in particular, it's just not been compelling in the slightest during this trilogy. Mostly, it's just been Patch over here giving longing looks to Jean while she's in an active marriage with Scott. The most development we ever got was Mystique pretending to be Jean in order to taunt the Music Man.
What do you really want?
This was of course a cover-up for his true desire to have loving relations with Stryker. Anyway, the love triangle story thing always felt super forced and uncomfortable because of the invasion into another couple's relationship, and the fact that Jean never really seemed to reciprocate in any real way, though that may have been because they were allergic to developing her as an actual character with wants and needs and interests and traits. This trilogy really isn't great at doing female characters, but it's made a million times worse because of how they decided to adapt the Dark Phoenix storyline. For those of you who don't know, and I'm guessing that's not a lot of you, so I'll keep this quick, the Dark Phoenix saga is a comic storyline where Jean Grey gets possessed by this evil, dark fire energy being alien thing called the Phoenix Force, and then bad things ensue. It's an incredibly iconic X-Men storyline, as evidenced by the fact that even I know about it. It's also a pretty simple scenario. You'd think it'd be pretty hard to mess up. You'd be wrong. Because you see, after having Jean crushed under a lake full of water in the last movie, she emerges from the lake unannounced, and we learn that she's already got the Phoenix inside of her. How is this possible, you may ask? Well, it's possible because in this version, Jean has DID. And the Phoenix, the unstoppable evil force that drives Jean to destroy everything, is just an altar. Fucking great job, guys. You made it offensive. Good work. Good work. Anyways, back to the love triangle. This split personality version of Phoenix reveals that Jean was always in love with the man from Down Under. And I think the implication is supposed to be that she killed Scott so that Jean could be with him, which, ugh. This further spins into a weird character thing where Jean joins Magneto after being questioned about if she killed her husband. And then so she's at the big final battle and she decides to kill everyone with like this ball of destruction around her, which evaporates everything except the buff guy's pants. Convenient. And what, may you ask, is the final culmination of this love story for the ages? I'm glad we were able to experience that together. You would think that would be the end of this movie's problems, but nope. Let's talk about Magneto. My god, this movie is just full of character assassination, huh? What is this? Character assassination city? They really do a number on Eric in this one. This movie makes the daring choice to remind everyone that Eric was a Holocaust survivor.
I have been marked once, my dear, and let me assure you, no needle shall ever touch my skin again.
You know who you're talking to?
And then for the rest of the movie, they have him dressed like he's a member of the Third Reich. Nice one. But guys, don't you get it? It's like he became the thing he swore to destroy. I mean, not really, because he's still just a freedom fighter fighting for basic rights, but I, the writer, drew the parallel. Oh god, I'm so clever. Magneto is also just generally a lot more cruel and unsympathetic in this movie than he is in the other ones. He was a bad dude before, but at least he was like understandable, and the bad things he did were to further a goal. Here though, he's just a terrible person for no reason. In the finale, during the big final battle, he directly sacrifices so many of his followers unnecessarily so that they could be fucking human shields.
Traitors to their own cause.
Bro, you were literally sacrificing your troops like chess pawns. You have no room to talk. Whatever happened to caring about mutant kind? And let's not forget how he treats Raven, which, let's just finally address. I really don't like Mystique's design in these movies. It seems like it's trying to go for sexy, but it just comes across as uncomfortable and exploitative. Especially when you learn that the actress didn't have a bodysuit, so she's practically naked the whole time, minus some scales and blue body paint. It's so goddamn uncomfortable and unnecessary. ugh. Her comic book look is perfectly fine. It's not like her power means that she can't make clothes for herself. You're just being fucking weird. The only reason I'm mentioning it in this movie and not before is because there's a scene where she loses her powers, and because of how they did her design, she's just naked on the floor now. It's so weird. And this wasn't even one of the movies directed by the rapist. Anyway, this scene ruins Magneto further because he looks Raven dead in the eyes right after she lost her powers, which in this oppression metaphor, and especially in her role as a freedom fighter, means she just lost her identity, and says this.
I'm sorry, my dear. You're not one of us anymore. Such a shame. She was so beautiful.
What the hell, dude? Not only is that needlessly cruel, it's stupid. Cause after this, she turns him into the authorities, cause fucking obviously. This isn't Magneto fighting for a cause, it's him being pig-headed about a very specific framing of his own ideology. This is a bit of a theme. Magneto is not only ruined as far as core motivations go, he's also just one of the stupidest motherfuckers I've ever seen in a movie. Not only does he sacrifice his own troops, not only does he doom himself with how he handles Raven, but he also is an idiot with handling Jean. He wields her like a toy when she's clearly an atomic bomb just itching to go off. He tries to intimidate her with the anti-mutant gun, which nearly completely backfires, and he even starts yelling at Jean while Charles is trying to get her to calm down, which ends up in his closest friend and rival being Thanos'd by her.
Charles Xavier did more for mutants than you'll ever know. My single greatest regret is that he had to die for our dream to live.
If only I could have done anything to prevent his death. R.I.P. Charles. Maybe he'll get recasted. Oh, hey, it's Stan Lee. But for however stupid Magneto was in this movie, he did not deserve what happened to him in the end. This brings me to my final big complaint. This movie majorly fumbles the mutant metaphor. In case you don't know, the plot of this movie revolves around a cure for mutants. A treatment that turns mutants into humans, essentially. It's got the same weird implications as Magneto's plan in the first movie, except it's a million times worse, partially because it's a reversal where the treatment essentially assimilates minorities into the majority. This would be bad enough, but the movie also draws attention to the holes in the mutant metaphor. There's an argument to be made that mutants are an odd choice to represent oppressed classes because they can pose a genuine danger to people. There's an infamous comic where one kid's mutation is literally just making everything that's alive around him blow up. That is an extreme example, but it's not too far off from how the cure in this movie is presented as a solution for Rogue, whose power makes it difficult to have physical relationships with people. This leads to another infamous scene from this movie.
Is it true? They can cure us?
Yes, Rogue, it appears to be true.
No, Professor. They can't cure us. You want to know why? Because there's nothing to cure. Nothing's wrong with you. Or any of us, for that matter.
Wow, Storm, good point. It makes me wonder if your perspective is different though, as essentially a weather deity talking to the girl who kills everything she touches. Possibly a bit of an oopsie there. I don't blame Halle Berry though. It's not her fault she was given a fake script to try and convince her into signing on to this movie. That's true, by the way. The version of the script that she was shown was a lot more Storm-centric, and was explicitly written to try and trick her into signing on because of her popularity. In case you thought studio execs weren't scummy enough. But during the course of this story, we see the mutant cure storyline presented in a way where it's akin to a voluntary medical procedure with protesters outside, which kind of evokes anti-abortion imagery. But since in this case the cure is supposed to be the bad thing, does that mean we're supposed to sympathize with the anti-choice people? That seems to be how it's framed with Angel's story, where he breaks out of a surgical procedure that would have taken away his freedom, all with triumphant music. But at the same time, Rogue's storyline continues down this path, and her happy ending is her actually receiving the cure. Similarly, this weird incoherence comes to a head in the finale, where Magneto and his Brotherhood are trying to stop the cure from being made, and the X-Men are trying to stop them, but also trying to stop the cure from being made, but also using the cure on Magneto's mutants, including Magneto himself. So, which is it? Is mutation something that needs to be cured, or is an identity worth preserving? Is the movie just saying that it's bad to do eugenics on people unless they're doing it voluntarily or they're bad people? Unclear. Honestly, I don't think this was even really intentional. The imagery and cues they take from real life seem to be thrown together kind of haphazardly with no rhyme or reason or underlying ideology. The end result is just kinda gibberish. Anyway, this fucking mess of a movie ends with pretty much all of the major X-Men dead, except for Scowls over here, and with a scene of Magneto sitting in a park. The 70-year-old Holocaust survivor who the heroes of this movie chose to effectively amputate his abilities from, staring at a chess piece, in a direct reference to the friend that he caused the death of stupidly. Sad and alone, and nothing but the slight wobble of the metal to comfort him. What a happy ending. Needless to say, this movie was terrible. So terrible that my final score of 3 out of 10 feels generous. That was rough. People said that these movies got bad at points, but I did not think they would get this bad. Oh well, at least it can't get any worse, right? It got worse. X-Men Origins Wolverine, like The Last Stand, directly before it, has a reputation for being one of the worst superhero movies ever made, which so far just shows that they really know how to keep a streak going over at Fox. You're making history, guys. I'm proud of you. I already knew that I wasn't going to enjoy this movie because of its reputation, but also because of a factor that you may have noticed me dancing around a little bit in the last 3 sections. Well, I'm just going to rip off the band-aid now. I don't really care for Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. Now, let me be clear. This is not me saying that I don't like Wolverine. Wolverine isn't my favorite superhero or anything. He's not even my favorite X-Men character, but I do think he's a fun presence. From what I've seen of him in other Marvel media he's appeared in, including comics and video games and cartoon shows, he's this short, feral asshole who's got this kind of dirty charm to him. He's fun, and I really understand the appeal. And I'll say it, the claws are cool. I like the claws. They go schnick, and he like stabs people. You know, it's fun for the whole family. I also don't want you to think I dislike Hugh Jackman. I love Hugh Jackman.
Yeah. Huge Ackman? That's a ridiculous name. It doesn't even sound real.
He's an excellent performer, and he's got a ridiculous amount of charisma. The problem is, I just don't really see him as Wolverine. I know it's his most iconic role, and it's the role that everyone associates with him, but I'll say it. I think he was miscast. This might just be my theater kid side talking, but to me, Jackman always thrived in more theatrical and showy roles, especially when you could hear him sing. He doesn't give a bad performance in these movies, since I honestly am not sure that he's capable of that, but it doesn't feel like Wolverine, though a not insignificant part of that is due to how he's written in these movies. He just kind of feels like a generic, gruff action hero guy, without a lot of the down and dirty personality that the character has in other ventures. Whenever he's in one of these movies, it's usually just to be kinda gruff and boring. I don't know, he's just not that interesting to me. He's also kind of sexist in these movies, which bothers me, and the fact that they push the Gene X Logan ship so hard is so grating. I don't care for it. It insists upon itself. All this is to say that I wasn't really looking forward to watching Origins, and I was right to do so. It's quite bad.
I'm afraid of dying.
How do you know? You've never tried it before.
Lame. Lame! Origins is so weird and confused, and ultimately it seems as though it's because it's trying to do multiple things and failing at all of them. First and foremost, it's trying to be an origin story for this version of Wolverine, which just doesn't work at all. The most obvious issue is that a lot of Wolverine's origin story, or the interesting parts anyway, was already covered in X2. This isn't to say the movie couldn't have done a good job and added new layers to that storyline and done something interesting, but it does mean that they were at a bit of a disadvantage. Theoretically though, that issue isn't crippling to the core premise of this movie, or what makes it fall flat. No, the reason that Origins' premise is so fucked is due to an issue that permeates throughout the movie, and is one that will have catastrophic repercussions for the rest of the movies in this franchise. It really likes to play around with the timeline. Cramp. The timeline, X-Men timeline's so bad, it's so bad that it's making my foot cramp. Now, for all of the last few movies' faults, particularly The Last Stands, they all at least had a fairly consistent and coherent timeline. This changes with Origins. Obviously, Origins is a prequel movie, so we're already off to a bad start. The way that this movie messes around with the pretty simple Wolverine backstory showcased in X2 and vastly overcomplicates it by adding new storylines and plot details is really noticeable. For example, the original storyline had Wolverine go into the Weapon X program because he was a mutant soldier, have it go badly, and then have Stryker erase his memory after the fact, creating all the amnesia angst and giving Logan a reason to blame Stryker for his memory loss. Pretty simple, right? Easy to follow and understand. Well, in Origins, it's changed so that Logan kills his biological father and grows up with his brother Victor, who has a similar healing factor to him, and the two seemingly fight in every possible American war, including Vietnam, where they are recruited by Stryker into a mutant government task force that ends up being pretty war-crimey, which Logan refuses to be peer pressured into and then dips. He then starts a nice domestic life chopping wood, which is brought to an end by Victor coming back and then seemingly killing his girlfriend Kayla, who we'll get back to. Logan, mad with vengeance, meets with Stryker and agrees to join the Weapon X program, which goes as you'd expect, and instead of Stryker erasing his memory, Logan hears that he wants to erase his memory, escapes, and then the whole rest of the movie happens. And at the very end, Stryker shoots Logan in the head with an adamantium bullet, which destroys the part of his brain that had the memories so they don't regenerate. This apparently was completely intentional, because Stryker says that he knew that the bullet wouldn't kill Logan, despite spending the entire movie saying that it would, and that he intended on erasing Logan's memory that way. So that all the angst about Stryker erasing Logan's memory is still technically true. And let's not forget that Stryker paid Victor to seemingly kill Logan's girlfriend so he could manipulate him into joining the Weapon X program. And also don't forget that Logan's girlfriend wasn't actually dead either, and that Stryker organized that too. Again, I'll get to that. You see what I mean about it being vastly overcomplicated? And that's only talking about all the Wolverine-specific timeline shenanigans, cause, oh yeah, Cyclops is also in this movie for a not insignificant amount of time. Bet you all forgot about that. I sure didn't. We see his origin story too, and he's also there for most of the climax. A climax that also includes a terrifying CGI de-aged Charles Xavier, which just causes so many issues timeline-wise it's not even worth getting into. Aside from the characters that we've already seen in these movies, Origins also introduces quite a few comic book characters in varying shades of blah. In this film, we have the only appearance of Gambit in any of these movies. Gambit is a fun character who's pretty hard to mess up. They somehow do it, though.
That's a nice stick. That's cool.
We shouldn't have the characters telling us when something is cool. It should just be cool, damn it. And the Blob's here, too. Awesome, my favorite X-Men character with no gross implications whatsoever. This scene does have my favorite joke in the movie, though.
Come on, bub, for old time's sake, huh?
Did you just call me Blob?
It's not much, but it's nice when there's a functional joke instead of just stock action movie dialogue.
Still shooting first, asking questions later?
That line is so unnatural. What are you doing, Hugh? This movie has more shoved in cameos than your average late show Mandalorian episode, and I haven't even talked about the worst and most infamous one. The one thing anyone remembers about this movie, the time that they butchered a character so badly that it's ironically kind of comical.
Mutant killer. Deadpool.
Yeah. The funny thing about this is that they didn't actually start off all that bad with him. Early in the movie, they have Wade Wilson as this smart-talking, well-trained katana guy working with the Stryker mutant squad, despite not being a mutant. I'll get to that. Who had a good energy to him.
Great. Stuck in an elevator with 5 guys on a high-protein diet.
Oh, Wade.
Dreams really do come true.
So just shut it. You're up next.
Thank you, sir. You look really nice today. It's the green. Brings out the seriousness in your eyes.
Oh my god, you ever shut up, pal?
If you knew nothing about this movie, but you knew about the character Deadpool, this would seem to be a fairly solid foundation from which to build a reasonably accurate depiction of the character, instead of this.
Wait, is that you? Your Stryker finally figured out how to shut you up.
I have no words, much like this version of Deadpool. Also, the reason that this guy technically isn't a mutant is because Stryker somehow surgically implanted mutant abilities like Logan's healing factor into him, which is just Another example of things being vastly overcomplicated. And the sewn up mouth, my God, the mouth. The mouth isn't even the worst thing about this, it's the goddamn katana claws. They gave him Wolverine claws, except they're katanas. It removes the functionality of the katana training, looks fucking stupid, and it draws attention to the fact that there's nowhere for the katanas to fit in his arm. Where are these enormous blades coming from? This is a superhero movie. I shouldn't be thinking about the logistics of arm katanas while these two fight on a green screen that could put Quantumania to shame. And that is another thing. I'm not usually one to knock on visual effects. It's hard out there being a VFX artist, and I'm all too familiar with how hard that can be as someone who spent his childhood trying to create sci-fi and superhero movies on my own. Hi there, it's me, from the video you were just watching. Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which but my God, the VFX in this movie are really something else. Oh look, he's destroying the bathroom by accident. It's like that one scene in The Amazing Spider-Man. A good movie. I could be watching that movie right now instead of this. It calls to mind the infamous story that you might not know if you're too young to remember. I say that because I was too young to remember it, where an unfinished work print of Origins was leaked and spread around a month before the movie officially premiered. It was pretty much the same movie, just with unfinished VFX and audio. The story of how that got leaked is actually pretty interesting, so I'll put a link to that in the doobly-doo. I just wanted to bring it up as a reminder that this is the finished version. So the movie's not great, obviously. It's an odd mishmash of comics lore, 80s action movie tropes, and strange writing decisions. But why is it like that? Well, as is often the case, it's mostly due to studio interference. But this time it's further complicated by the 2008 Writers Guild strike, which took place while this was filming. This was a problem because apparently the screenplay for this movie literally wasn't finished when they began shooting, with a lot of scenes being incomplete or constantly being changed by the studio. In fact, the character of Deadpool/Wade Wilson apparently had no lines written at all. All of Deadpool's dialogue in this movie is improvised, which all things considered means they did pretty well here. Apparently, the choice to have Deadpool's mouth be sewn shut is because they didn't want to have to worry about having writers to write dialogue for this famously witty character. I don't know if that's actually true, but if it is, you could not have Shakespeare write something more poetic than studio execs literally sewing a character's mouth shut rather than pay their writers. Anyway, this kind of writer's environment explains classic writing decisions like choosing to fridge Wolverine's love interest, have her come back to life as a twist where she faked her own death and was working for a villain of the story all along, and then have her switch sides and eventually kill her for real, fridging her again. Wild. This movie truly is one of a kind. So yeah, this movie is worse than X3 somehow. While X3 was a confusing mess of character assassination and muddled social and political themes, it was still a semi-competent movie at the end of the day. Not a high bar, but one that Origins wasn't able to clear. The most enjoyment I got out of this movie was occasionally laughing at how ridiculous it was, but otherwise it was just a miserable slog. Maybe a movie to get intoxicated and then laugh at with friends. 1.5 out of 10. These last two movies were rough. I'm gonna need to have a bit of a palate cleanser before we move on. How about an ad break? Hello there, TSD viewers. I'm Jim Jimson, and I'm here to talk to you about a little something called Patreon. It's no secret that making content on YouTube is sometimes less than lucrative. And between you and me, TSD here is a little bit strapped for cash after graduating from college. So on his behalf, I'd like to present you all of the benefits of his Patreon page. Patrons of the channel get so many perks, including early access to videos and to episodes of the Podcast, hosted by TSD and Pillar of Garbage. You also get access to an exclusive channel in TSD's Discord server, exclusive content just like the director's commentary he just released on his video about high top films, your name in the credit of all videos, and the ability to vote on polls that decide future videos. And that's all at the lowest tier, which is just $3 a month. Higher tiers include perks like the ability to suggest video ideas and access to the monthly Movie Club, where we pick a movie to watch and then discuss. In theory, people do need to show up for that one after all. Oh, and TSD also wants me to add that in conjunction with all of those amazing perks, you will also receive, what was it? His eternal gratitude. gross, overly sentimental. Anyway, all of that sound like a deal? Well, come on down anyway to patreon.com/TSDTalks to see your options. That's patreon.com/TSDTalks.
Now, back to our program.
Thank God, we've got an actually good movie now. X-Men First Class is an interesting one because it represents a new era for these movies. The reboot era. We have a new cast, a new time period, and new ways to shake up the storyline. This movie is often credited for reviving the X-Men franchise, and it was a revival that was desperately needed. Part of this movie's success is the influx of new talent. Not only do we have a new cast that consists of heavy hitters like James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Jennifer Lawrence, Nicholas Hoult, Kevin Bacon, and more, we also have a new director in Matthew Vaughn, the director of Kick-Ass, Kingsman, and nothing else. He also, interestingly enough, was actually slated to direct The Last Stand, but left after the whole fake Hal Berry script thing, which, based. And how fitting that he gets to revive the franchise after the terrible road that movie sent it on. First Class is a reboot. Sort of. It functions as a soft reboot, but literally it's a prequel to all of the other movies, barring the opening sequence of Origins. First Class follows Charles Xavier, now played by McAvoy, before he was the bald, wheelchair-bound control freak that we know and love today. He meets Eric Lehnsherr, played by Michael Fassbender, before he became the kinda right all along the whole time supervillain, Magneto. Together, along with Raven Darkholme / Mystique, played by Jennifer Lawrence and who is weirdly now Charles's adoptive sister, they worked to form the first iteration, or class, you could say, of the X-Men in order to stop a mutant intervention in the already very delicate Cuban Missile Crisis. What?
Don't think about the timeline too hard. Trust me.
Okay. Anyway, there is a lot to like about this movie. It's kind of like a better version of the first X-Men movie in terms of structure, but it's got so much more sauce. I'm serious, this movie has got so much style that it should be illegal, much like Charles and Eric's relationship would have been in the 60s when this takes place. Say what you will about Matthew Vaughn, but he knows how to give a movie style, most of the time. But another part of that is the visual effects in this movie. It might not be anything particularly special by today's standards, but going from the last few movies in this franchise to this one, it was like night and day. This would have been a huge leap forward at the time, and you can really feel that watching them all back to back. I'm not just here to talk about how the movie looks, though. If I were, I would dedicate a couple of sections to this bisexual dream of a cast, but this video is long enough without my dissertation on Michael Fassbender's eyes. So let's talk about the characters. Charles is the first obvious choice, and he's at one of the most interesting places that we've seen him. A naive young man before he was a figurehead of the eternal mutant struggle. And so we can see that while he's an intelligent man who genuinely cares for the people in his life, he's too idealistic for his own good, and that idealism is often what pushes the people he cares about the most in his life away. He also has a certain lack of respect for other people's boundaries and an unshakable confidence in his own knowledge of what's best for others. Those factors can make him pretty dangerous, and we can see the seeds of them here. Charles is portrayed as an actual character, and less so the wise mentor figure he was in the previous movies. Except for The Last Stand, but I choose to ignore that movie in general. However compelling and charismatic he is in this movie though, he's not my favorite character. That honor belongs squarely to Eric Lehnsherr. Guys, Eric is so good in this movie. It helps that First Class is kinda his movie to begin with. Apparently First Class started development as purely a Magneto origin story movie. Another entry in the X-Men Origins franchise that Origins Wolverine was supposed to start. But, you saw how that went. Anyway, this movie repurposes all of that Origins Magneto drama and plays it to its full effect. This movie opens up with a recreation of the opening scene of the first movie, which is Eric as a young boy in a concentration camp. This scene is recreated and then expanded upon to show Eric's motivation, as well as build up the villain of the movie, Shaw. I'll get to him in a second. Anyway, this really sets the stage for Eric's arc, as well as the story of the rest of the movie. And that's just me proving that Magneto is awesome in this movie, even when Michael Fassbender isn't on screen. Oh, he's so good at acting. This entire bar sequence where he's hunting Nazis is unironically peak cinema. Speaking of Nazis, never thought I'd use that transition, Shaw is a really obvious hallmark of this movie's history as a Magneto origin story, because Eric is the only character who really has a personal motivation to stop him outside of just wanting to save the world. Everything from the personal background to Eric being the one to kill him, in the coldest death scene in any one of these movies, by the way, to him and Eric having parallels, with Shaw's plan in this movie essentially being a less stupid version of Magneto's plan in the first X-Men movie. And even Eric's signature telepathy blocking helmet being something that he got from Shaw. I don't really love that parallel though, even if I could see what they're going for, because at the end of the day, it's still a Holocaust survivor taking on the regalia of a Nazi, so still better than The Last Stand about it, though. And of course, I can't talk about Charles and Eric in this movie without mentioning the fact that they're obviously boyfriends. You'd think I'm joking, and to a certain extent, I guess I am. But whether it's intentional subtext or just a byproduct of the actors' chemistry together, those boys are super fucking gay for each other. Like, just look at them. Every moment that these two share on screen has more romantic tension to it than the entirety of the Jean X Logan ship in the original trilogy. Look at the way that he looks at him while they sit on steps together. This is just straight up yaoi. Happy Pride Month, by the way.
It's June 27th when I'm editing this. This is not coming out in Pride Month.
However, despite my adoration of Cherrick, there are quite a few other characters in this movie, and that's where it starts to fall apart a little bit for me. Starting with Hank/Beast, played by Nicholas Hoult, of all people. Bit of weird casting, not gonna lie, but we'll move past that. What I won't move past is how he's kind of a weird character. He starts off as just this kind of nerd guy with weird feet.
You know what they say about guys with big feet?
Ah, I see what you're getting at. They have big shoes. And they have him be so insecure about his well-endowed feet to the point that he creates a serum that turns him into the classic Beast look. Why did a green serum turn him blue? That's kind of unintuitive, and oh god, that design sucks. I hate to say it, but I think The Last Stand easily clears this one. There's also this super weird romance with Raven that doesn't really seem to go anywhere. I don't know, it's odd. Speaking of Raven, let's talk about the other big characterization issue that this movie has. Said issue is writing female characters. I'll actually swing back around to Raven in a sec, because right now I want to talk about Emma Frost. Emma Frost, while looking a lot better than her questionably canon appearance in Origins Wolverine VFX-wise, is kind of a sexy lamp. She's ostensibly Shaw's right-hand man, but she has very little personality outside of literally wearing a stripper's outfit and seducing men. It's a little bit uncomfortable, and it doesn't help that she's not the only female character who doesn't act as a stripper for a not insignificant amount of time. And if you count the fact that Raven is technically naked all the time, then that means that the only significant female character who isn't connected to stripping in some way is Moira, which is kind of absurd. Moira's not great either, by the way. She's barely in this movie, she doesn't do anything, and then Charles No Way Homes her at the end of the movie, erasing memories of your girlfriend against her wishes for the win. Actually, wait, no, hold on. Moira is connected to stripping. In her first scene, she poses as a stripper while undercover. Literally 100% of the major female characters in this movie are in some way connected to stripping, even though they all come from different areas and different walks of life. That's ridiculous. What are we doing here, Vaughn? Do we need an intervention? And Raven, oh boy, Raven is an odd one. I will say, before I deliver my criticism, she is a lot better than her original trilogy counterpart. Jennifer Lawrence is a charismatic actor, and she gives a good and memorable performance here. It also helps that Raven is treated like more of a person and given an actual role in the story comparatively. It makes it a lot easier to care about her and her struggle. Which is why it's so much more disappointing when it falls short of actually working. Ignoring that her design is still that, though at least by this point they had figured out that they could give the actress a bodysuit instead of literally having her just be naked with blue body paint. Raven's arc is ostensibly about finding her own path and being independent of society's expectations for her. They hammer home time and time again that she's going to be authentic to her true self and not care about what anyone thinks. Yet ultimately her choice is seemingly based on which man in her life she cares about the opinion of more. It's probably not what they were going for, but it's an unfortunate implication that really undermines her arc for me. Also, the choice to make her Charles' stepsister is just odd, and makes some of their later conversations really uncomfortable.
Would you date me?
Of course I would. Any young man would be lucky to have you. You're stunning.
Ew! Okay, first shut up.
I just don't understand why this is the dynamic that Hollywood writers always go with step-siblings. It's not like step-siblings need more people making it weird. And of course, I have to mention Darwin.
So tell me about your mutation.
Well, I adapt to survive.
Darwin is one of the mutants recruited for the X-Men and is there when Shaw first attacks the X-Men's compound. And in this scene, there are two moments that I want to point out. First of all, there's this.
Each of us will face a choice. Be enslaved.
Why did they cut to him when they said that? What are they trying to say here? It's so weird. Also, when Darwin inexplicably decides to join Shaw, this happens.
Adapt to this.
So, a couple things. First of all, I was originally going to say that Shaw seems racist for doing this, but then I remember that he's a literal fucking Nazi, so it makes sense. Secondly, and more importantly, you do know what Darwin's power is, right? It's literally not dying. His whole thing is that in any situation, he adapts so that he will not die. In the comics, this dude literally turned into energy to avoid dying. And he's the first and only member of the X-Men to die in this movie. And he's the only black dude. What are you doing? Bringing it back to stuff that I liked, I was a big fan of the finale in this movie. It's just such a perfectly choreographed final battle, with the two world superpowers at standstill as the mutants square off. There's a moment where everyone's working together, and then once Shaw is dead, everything falls apart. And it fundamentally comes down to the difference in ideology between the star-crossed lovers.
Eric, you said yourself, we're the better men. This is the time to prove it. There are thousands of men on those ships, good, honest, innocent men. They're just following orders.
I've been at the mercy of men just following orders. Never again.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP!
Charles is fundamentally an assimilationist, and Eric wants the hate that caused his pain to never happen again. This movie has, so far, come closest to showcasing these two men's underlying ideologies in a way that makes sense. And it hurts to see their big ol' breakup. Not as much as it hurts Charles' spine, though. And he cradles his boyfriend in his arms. How sweet.
We're brothers, you and I.
You can tell yourself that. I know what you are. In conclusion, this movie is the only movie in history that actually knows what the original Jekyll and Hyde book was about, so it's perfect.
Story wasn't really about good and evil, though, was it, Hank? It was about man's animal nature and his struggle to control it, to conform.
Me from 2 years ago would have been so happy watching this movie. In all seriousness, this movie had its definite weak points, but the strong points were really strong and compelling. 8 out of 10. I hope to see the boyfriends kiss and make up. Now, another nice perk about this movie is that outside of a short cameo, I got to have a nice break from Logan.
Excuse me, I'm Eric Lensher.
Charles Xavier.
Go fuck yourself.
That was really refreshing. Oh, what's up next? Oh. Right. You know what? Actually, I'm okay with this. Out of all the X-Men movies, the Wolverine feels like the one that's the most forgotten. All of the mainline X-Men films have their own reputations, for better or for worse. Deadpool has made its own splash. Origins, and even the New Mutants is somewhat notorious for its troubled production.
Not okay.
Meanwhile, the Wolverine is so forgotten by the world at large that I didn't even know it existed until I started working on this video. And so it was a big old question mark on my list where I had no idea what to expect. And having now watched it, honestly, it's a bit of a shame that it's so forgotten because it's actually pretty solid. Now, keep in mind that my standards for a passable Wolverine movie are low at this point. And this movie was really fighting an uphill battle for my enjoyment from the get-go, because of my previously established feelings about Jackman's Wolverine, as well as the fact that this movie is pretty directly a sequel to the events of The Last Stand. Despite all of that though, I was pleasantly surprised to find that I actually really enjoyed this movie. And it's not overly complicated as to why, either. To begin with, it just looks really good. It benefits from the same upgrade in visual effects that First Class ushered in, bringing us the first ever version of the Wolverine claws in these movies that actually look real. But it's also just really well directed and shot. James Mangold brings a kind of dark and damp feel through the cinematography that really sells the more personal and small scale story they're going for. The action is also really tight and fun, particularly this bullet train sequence, which of course shamelessly rips off the movie Bullet Train 9 years before its release. More generally, the combat is just so much more visceral and intriguing. This is the first time I really saw the appeal of Wolverine's fighting style when it's done well, and it didn't even have to make it R-rated. I know there's a cut that's R-rated, but honestly I'm satisfied with this. This is good. Another thing that I really liked was that the movie didn't dumb down the spoken Japanese sections. Obviously most of the movie is in English, but that's only really when Logan is on screen. Diegetically, it makes sense for the Japanese characters to be speaking English with him because he doesn't speak Japanese. However, when there are two characters whose first language is Japanese, they do the realistic thing and have the two characters speak Japanese to each other. It never feels like a movie that's obviously catering to an American audience. It is a low bar, but it's something that I'm glad the movie did anyway, because it's a pet peeve, but it always bothers me when movies don't do that. The characterization isn't like amazing, but it really does work for me. The side cast is all pretty well acted, and they all feel like their roles are important to the story being told. Ichiro is a character with an interesting storyline that honestly I don't really want to spoil if you ever plan to watch this movie for yourself, but he managed to take a pretty by the numbers motivation and make it work. Viper is really fun as a villainous henchman, and while she's a bit more comic booky than the rest of the cast, she's really well performed and chews the scenery just the right amount. She's also got a certain charisma to her. I'd let her do that to me, no question. Mariko is a little bit of a weak point for me, but not as much as she could have been. The romance between her and Logan is a bit weird, and sometimes she's a little bit of a passive player for my tastes, but she's still well acted and compelling in her own right, and her conflict with her family is well played. Her not being terrible also by default makes her Logan's best love interest, so, you know, there's that. Yukio though, whew.
This sword is hundreds of years old. It was named Danzan by the first samurai who used it. Danzan means separator in Japanese. The ideal weapon for separating head and limb from body. Like so.
I really like Yukio. She's really fun, and her kind of snarky but not quite personality is a really good balance for Logan's gruff loner shtick. She's kind of like a cool samurai Ellie to Logan's Joel. And it's also nice that she's not sexualized. Again, low bar to clear, but it would have been so easy for them to make the Japanese samurai warrior lady a fetishized mess, and I was so relieved that they didn't do that. She also works great as just a companion for Logan. Their friendship is one of the best things about this movie, and it's sad that this incarnation of Yukio isn't in any of the other movies. She would have been a really good traveling companion for Logan, and it would have continued to bring out an intriguing side to his character. As for the main man himself, I think this movie made me like Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. I still think the casting is weird and not really an accurate adaptation of the character from what I've seen, but this movie really made me care for and understand the character as presented. Hugh Jackman is a damn good actor, and he really gets to showcase that he can give this character life when he's given some solid writing to prop him up. The thing that really makes Logan work in this movie is that they give him a good struggle to work through. Obviously, he feels like shit after the events of The Last Stand, which, you know, same, but probably not for the same reasons. But he's also made more vulnerable in this movie due to his healing factor being severely handicapped. It always makes it so that he feels like he is in actual danger and his struggle feels more real and difficult. He isn't this unstoppable berserker fighter anymore. He has to be careful and pace himself. And so it makes the final fight where he gains his healing factor back feel earned and satisfying. It also just makes imagery like him with a back full of arrows feel more painful and emotionally satisfying when he's not just ripping them out of his back like nothing happened. As for the gene hallucinations, look, I don't need to make my feelings about the Jean x Logan stuff known again. The constant hallucinations at first were just a reminder for how much I didn't care for their relationship in the last movies. However, this movie does something that I wasn't expecting. It actually makes the angst feel earned. It's a foundation that this movie builds upon to make a really emotional arc for Logan about letting go of his guilt and allowing himself to move on. It kind of touched me in a way that I would not have expected Jean x Logan to in any way, shape, or form. It almost makes me okay with the ending of The Last Stand for allowing this to happen. Almost. And finally, this might be a bit of a controversial take, but the third act of this movie is so much fun. It might not gel 100% with the Yakuza drama of the first 2/3, and I can see how that might be a turnoff for some people, but me, I get to see Wolverine fight a giant robot samurai while Yukio duels with Viper and Wolverine's claws get cut off, but his healing factor comes back and they grow back as the bone claws. Fuck yeah, get his ass, Logan! Honestly, that kind of sums up this movie for me. It's not perfect, but it's really fun and earnest in a way that I haven't seen a portrayal of this Wolverine be. And it made me like this Wolverine when he had a character arc based on events from X3, which I hated. That in of itself is an achievement, so you know what? Fuck it, Wolverine gets an 8 out of 10. Just a real good time. Oh, wait, the end credit scene, how could I forget? The end credit scene shows Logan in an airport where he's confronted by oh, hell yeah. Yes, Eric! I mean, it's a little weird that he has his powers back, but I guess they hinted at that at the ending scene of The Last Stand, so...
Hello, Logan.
Oh, and Charles is here. He exploded, though.
Somehow.
That's a little harder to recover from, I think. But I guess it's kind of explained by the end credit scene of The Last Stand as well. So that's kind of stretching things a little bit. But you know what? It's one more step that this movie takes towards making it so that The Last Stand doesn't matter anymore. So I'm good with it. And hey, this whole scene sets up the next movie, one that I've been really excited to talk about. Everyone, please put your hands together for... Guys, I think it might be the Stockholm Syndrome setting in, but these movies are kind of great now. X-Men Days of Future Past is a kind of a special one for me because I suppose technically it was the first X-Men movie I watched. I already mentioned an hour ago that before starting this project, the most I had seen in these movies was the last 40 minutes or so of Days of Future Past, which is still true. However, I kind of forgot what happened in those 40 minutes outside of like flashes of moments, so I was still able to enjoy this on its own terms. And boy did I. This movie is my jam as far as the mainline X-Men movies go. I mean, you start off the movie with a dark post-apocalyptic future with weird shape-shifting robots and a permanently cloudy sky, and everything's purple. You are speaking my language, creative lead for this movie who will go unnamed. Obviously, this is only the setup for the movie and isn't the vibe constantly throughout, but it does kind of showcase something that is great. It seems as though ever since First Class, these movies have had a life-saving injection of sauce. Maybe it was the influence of Vaughn's creative input on this one that helped, despite him leaving the project fairly early on. Going back to the intro, this oppressive and dark atmosphere is incredibly well executed. Days of Future Past is the X-Men movie that's the biggest in scope so far, acting as a big old culmination of the franchise where the team faces off against the greatest enemy they've ever encountered. The franchise's timeline. Yeah, so this is a time travel movie, yet it's somehow one of the least chronologically confusing movies in this franchise. I've always been a big fan of well-done time travel movies, and this is certainly one of those. It also, on a metatextual level, is marrying the old and the new of the franchise into one big event, and giving a good old send-off for those old movies. Part of that send-off is seemingly to have major cast members from those old movies murdered by robots. Yeah, sorry, he was revealed as gay in the comics, so the straight version of the character had to be killed. I completely understand. These robots, aka Sentinels for all you non-X-Men heads, including me, are designed to hunt mutants. But as time went on and mutants became more scarce, they adjusted their parameters to hunt anyone who carried the X gene, or anyone who is related to them, or anyone who is related to them, and so on until you get the Blade Runner X scenario showcased here. Yet somehow they left the most iconic X-Men characters alive. Interesting. The core plot thread of this movie is the remaining X-Men, including Magneto, sending Logan back in time so that he can prevent this future from ever happening. Cutting between the future timeline and the past timeline throughout this movie's runtime allows us to really sit with and compare the old cast and the new cast. It's a really nice way to demonstrate the strengths of these two sets of character portrayals with these iconic actors. The part where Sir Patrick Stewart and James McAvoy share a one-on-one scene together really puts this into sharp focus and is just a banger scene in general. Just look at this shot. Putting two great actors across from each other makes a great scene, who would have guessed? The time travel plot device also makes it so these movies can try to address some of the really off-putting timeline inconsistencies that you might have noticed by making it so that everything post First Class is now in a different timeline altogether due to Wolverine's intervention. That does a lot of hand-waving that makes it so that the past movies can be easy to discard in the future. However, it does leave some questions unanswered. Why does the past portion of this movie take place 10 years after the events of First Class in 1973 when seemingly no one has aged? If Trask was supposed to have died in 1973, why is he in The Last Stand and very much not played by Peter Dinklage? And hey, why is Kitty Pryde able to send Logan back in time when that was never her power set? And why does Charles...
Don't worry about it. Just enjoy yourself.
All right. You know what? Fair enough. It doesn't do well to dwell on this when I enjoyed the movie so much. It's got a fun adventure vibe, and the cast has got a great outlet to showcase their abilities. There are some great new cast members who get some time to shine, like Trask and Quicksilver. Trask, despite the aforementioned weird continuity, is a real highlight as the villain of this movie. He's similar to Stryker in X2 in that he represents a side of human authority and bigotry that no mutant folk can ever really compare to. As the creator of Sentinels, he spews a kind of anti-mutant rhetoric that is very reminiscent of how IRL bigots talk about marginalized groups, particularly in regards to white supremacy.
To Homo neanderthalensis, his mutant cousin Homo sapiens, which is us, was an aberration. The arrival of the mutated human species, Homo sapiens, was followed by the immediate extinction of their less evolved kin. Well, now we are the Neanderthal.
Very great replacement theory of you, Trask. He works on multiple fronts because the goal isn't just to stop him from creating the Sentinels, it's to stop him from being killed by Mystique and being a martyr for the anti-mutant cause, which ultimately is what brings his Sentinel program to fruition. It's all about the balancing act between immediate justice and securing the future. Quicksilver is also a fun addition. He's not in the movie for very long because apparently his role was added super late into production after Fox and Disney finalized their deal to share the character across multiple franchises. And while this incarnation of the faster Maximoff sibling isn't perfect.
Peter, the cops are here.
Really, guys, we're angelicizing Pietro? Okay. He's far better treated than the version in Avengers Age of Ultron. I know this point has probably been beaten to death by now, but you had to kill the speedy guy with bullets.
You didn't see that coming.
Really, Joss? That was the line you went with? Or was that another brilliant line that would have been an all-time classic if delivered with a little bit more snark? Anyway, this Quicksilver rules, and the time in a bottle scene is still one of the coolest sequences in any movie. I don't even know if it can get better than this. Moving on, the returning cast is great too. Hank's not very notable besides the fact that he's no longer big and blue because of a serum or something, I guess. He transforms back though, and it looks way better than it did in First Class, so you know, props for that. Charles is very well acted by both actors, as previously discussed, and honestly, I don't think either actor really outdoes each other on that front. Younger Charles does get more to do, though, and he's got a good arc where he stops pining for his ex-boyfriend so much and allows himself to accept his mutant identity. Eric is in a similar place, though the difference is exacerbated by the fact that Ian McKellen has even less to do than Patrick Stewart, and Michael Fassbender just bodies this role every single time. The scene where Eric gets mad on the plane had me gripping my seat in more ways than one. However, I do think that Eric is a bit of a downgrade from his First Class self because he's committed to being a supervillain for reasons that really don't serve his motives all that well. I mean, he threatens a bunch of politicians who are on the fence about commissioning the Sentinel program, which he knows will end the world, and he still pushes forward with his intimidation plan. He knows what's at stake in this conflict, but he chooses to float a baseball stadium around and make big speeches about his intention to declare war to the politicians that he doesn't want to commission the program that would stop him.
You're right to fear us. We are the future. We are the ones who will inherit this earth. And anyone who stands in our way will suffer the same fate as these men you see before you. Today was meant to be a display of your power. Instead, I give you a glimpse of the devastation my race can unleash upon yours.
Like, I know he's supposed to be a villain or whatever, but this is really forced, even if he looks good while doing it. The gay stuff gets no notes from me. I still love it.
Professor I know would never turn his back on someone who lost their path, especially someone he loved.
So true. He and Eric should just kiss and make up already. As for Logan, I don't really know what it was, but I think the Wolverine clicked for me in a way that I now really like his character in this movie. It also helps that he's just way more fun.
Is that the system I designed? To record any news about Paris over all 3 networks and PBS.
All 3? Wow.
Like, who's this guy? Why is he so much more likable now? Giving him personality actually improved his role in the story? What? Also, that ending he gets with the OG cast is a tad fan servicey, but you know what? I don't care. He seems happy for the first time ever, so I'll allow it. And it's not like he and Jean end up together.
Whoa. Easy, pal.
Yeah, Scott, get his ass. But the best main character is the one that vastly improved from First Class. You guys, Raven absolutely kicks ass in this movie. Like, the difference is night and day. Obviously, Jennifer Lawrence is still great in this role, but she's so helped by actually being given stuff to do. It's her decision and her arc that are important in the end. She actually gets to make the important moral choice that determines the future. And generally, she's just badass as this independent vigilante working to better the future for mutants while unknowingly causing its downfall. It's so juicy and great, and it almost makes up for how her design still fucking sucks. Overall, Days of Future Past was such a refreshing experience. It balances out the cast between the old and the new in a way that really made me appreciate them both on their own terms. It bookends the old movies in a satisfying way, and sets the franchise on a new path, taking the setup from First Class and fine-tuning the elements that didn't quite work. There's some missteps, but they are made up for with how resonant the themes are, and just the levels of sauce help paper over any rough edges. This entry is an easy 8.5 to 9 out of 10 in my book. The future is looking bright. So let's take a detour from the main course and talk about the other spin-off series in this franchise.
Hey, yeah, I wanna shoot, baby.
I think this section might be where I start losing people because, to me at least, this movie is unironically pretty great. Deadpool is a spin-off of the main X-Men films, taking place in the same universe but being pretty disconnected narrative-wise. It follows Wade Wilson / Deadpool, played by Ryan Reynolds, who is a version of the weird Katana Man from Origins. It's got arguably the most annoying vigilante in all of superhero comics as the lead, and I kind of love it. Now listen, I know Deadpool has a reputation, at least among a lot of people. That reputation being that Deadpool is a character that solely appeals to, in no uncertain terms, edgy teenagers who like cynicism, violence, and dick jokes. So, the average Rick and Morty fan. And they're not entirely wrong. The violence and the potty humor are a draw to some of the audiences of the movie. However, in my book, that's really not the whole story. I will start off by saying that I really like fourth wall breaking stuff. I know some people find it annoying, and I agree that when it's lazy or overdone, it can get kinda grating. Just like any form of humor can. But Deadpool isn't really a movie that does that. I was actually pretty apprehensive about the movie because of all the reasons I just listed, but the genuinely pretty clever joke with the opening credits totally got me, and it alleviated a lot of my fears. And after that, the movie had me hooked. It's not just that joke either. By all accounts, this movie is actually pretty clever and charming. There are quite a few jokes that got a genuine laugh out of me.
Can we go?
Look! I'm a teenage girl. I'd rather be anywhere than here. I'm all about long, sullen silences, followed by mean comments, followed by more silences. So what's it gonna be, huh? Long, sullen silence or mean comment? Go on.
You got me in a box here.
There are some kind of eye-rolly lines here and there, but something that makes the less clever jokes work is that they're not really the centerpiece for comedy. They're usually more so there to generate a kind of atmosphere for the movie and for Wade as a character. It doesn't really matter if you find jokes about Wolverine's balls funny, because what makes it charming is that the character of Deadpool finds it funny and is having fun, so no matter what, you're in on the joke. Look at him, he's just a girl having fun.
Did I leave the stove on?
The action in this movie, while sparingly used due to the decreased budget, helps with this tone too, since it's all kind of ridiculous in a nearly cartoony way. It also helps that Deadpool has a lot of people to bounce off of that aren't just the camera. This movie is connected to the X-Men movies after all, so we've got to have some X-Men characters. The most notable being Colossus, who previously actually showed up in the original trilogy, as well as Days of Future Past. He looked pretty different though. The continuity is a little bit whack, especially if you consider the fact that this is supposed to be a version of Wade from X-Men Origins Wolverine, which took place in the 60s and 70s, whereas this takes place in the modern day, and you can't really explain the alteration through Days of Future Past because that takes place after Origins. And hey, now that I think about it, I've noticed that...
You have to please stop worrying about this timeline stuff. Oh my god.
Okay, I cannot be the only one who saw that, right? I'm not hallucinating. Anyway, the side characters are a lot of fun and add a lot to the comedic sensibilities. Dopinder is a delightful side character, a seemingly innocent taxi driver who's just as sunshine and rainbows as you can get, while weirdly being a bit bloodthirsty. Blind Owl is barely in this movie, but she makes a good impression with the little amount of screen time she gets. This girl,
Negasonic Teenage Warhead.
Yeah, her. She's mostly just there to be a fun side presence and then occasionally use her actual powers. The previously mentioned Colossus is a fun, no-nonsense figurehead of authority for Deadpool to bounce off of. Francis is a bit of a by-the-numbers villain, but he's serviceable. And his constant annoyance at Deadpool's refusal to use his villain name is a cute bit, I like it. This movie is unfortunately infected with the presence of TJ Miller and Gina Carano. Carano isn't here for very long, fortunately, and can be mostly ignored. TJ Miller, though, is a bit harder to ignore, and it's made worse by the fact that he actually does have some funny bits.
I'd go with you, but I don't want to.
The bit where he describes what Deadpool looks like is very annoying and drawn out, though. I'm happy to admit that. Oh hey, it's Stan Lee. It's been a while since we've seen him, and his cameo is a bit atypical. But hey, at least it's good that he got another cameo in one of these movies since The Last Stand. That's a much bigger tarnish on your career than being in a stripped club in my book. And then there's Vanessa. Vanessa is such an underrated character because she's really one of the linchpins that make this movie work. Deadpool has a reputation for being snarky, cynical, and irreverent, and those are true to an extent. But what shocked me the most about this movie is that it's actually pretty sincere in its love story. One of the joke posters for this movie is a Valentine's Day poster that paints the movie as a straightforward rom-com. While funny, it actually isn't all that far off. The love story between Vanessa and Wade is played pretty straight. And in fact, the humor in the scenes the two characters share with each other comes from the genuine chemistry and repertoire that the two have together. Like, Vanessa and Wade feel like a real couple. I feel like I've met these people before, especially with their 4 Yorkshiremen-esque banter bit that they do.
Rough childhood.
Rougher than yours. Daddy left before I was born.
Daddy left before I was conceived.
We used to get up at 3, clean the lake, eat a handful of hot gravel, then we'd work in mill for 20 hours for 2pence a month, then we'd come home and Dad would beat us about the head and neck with a broken bottle. If we were lucky. Paradise.
It's kind of ridiculous how good the romance in this movie is, especially considering the quality of romances and female characters in general in these movies so far. I did not expect Deadpool of all movies to be the most effectively feminist. Get your act together, guys, Jesus. Another element that's shockingly effective in this movie is the drama, though I might have a bit of a bias in this regard. I don't really like getting super personal on this channel, so I'll make this quick. Late last year, a family member was diagnosed with cancer. She's okay now, don't worry, but I remember what it was like finding that out. What a shock that was. And because of that, the way that this movie depicted cancer as this bomb that could just drop in the middle of your life and change everything really affected me in a way I wasn't expecting. The rest of the dramatic tension about his own insecurity about how he looked following the mutation really sold the jokey persona as just that, a persona that he was playing up. It's not like Shakespeare or anything, but the romance and drama elements really sold me on the rest of the movie in a way that I think would mean that the charm would be diminished significantly if they weren't there. And I think that really gets at the core of why this movie works so well for me. Deadpool, by all accounts, is a movie that really should not exist. I don't mean that as a jab at its quality, I mean it literally. Deadpool spent 10 years in development hell, a time that saw the butchering of the character in Origins, as well as Ryan Reynolds starring in another terribly received superhero movie. It was also just a big ask for Fox executives to deliver. R-rated superhero movies like Blade and Kick-Ass and Watchmen existed, but they weren't huge recent hits, and generally something like Deadpool was seen as a huge risk. In fact, we probably wouldn't have gotten Deadpool in the first place if the test footage that the filmmakers made for Fox executives hadn't somehow leaked to the public and received a overwhelmingly positive critical reception from said public. Despite the overwhelming audience demand, they had a very limited budget in comparison to other contemporary superhero films, which led to them having to get creative with how they spent it. This was especially true in their marketing for the movie. The Deadpool marketing campaign was pretty fun. Not only did it include a bunch of fun posters, like the rom-com one I mentioned earlier, it was also seemingly based on a combination of viral marketing and Ryan Reynolds and other actors dressed up in the Deadpool suit just fucking around, appearing in everything from unconventional trailers to testicular cancer PSAs. My personal favorite is him messing around with these kids dressed up as the X-Men for Halloween.
Alright, Stevie Wonder, what's your superpower?
Shoot laser eyes out of my eyes.
That's the stupidest superpower I've ever heard. You're not on the team.
Such a wholesome figure for the children. Apparently Ryan Reynolds was very closely involved with the creation of the campaign, so, you know, take that with what you will. All this is to say that this was a movie that was fought for with tooth and nail by the people making it. And that passion is not only something I can really respect, it's also incredibly evident in the movie itself. You can really tell that the people making this movie want to make it and are having fun making it. I talked a little bit earlier about how I felt like some of the entries in the original X-Men trilogy felt embarrassed to be comic book movies. Deadpool does not have that problem. It knows what it is and 100% owns it. And even if it wasn't a movie that I already enjoyed, that confidence alone would be something that I respect. 8 out of 10. Man, we have been on a roll lately. First Class, The Wolverine, Days of Future Past, Deadpool. Talk about a hot streak, I mean. You know, I was pretty critical of the first few movies in this franchise, but they've really been making up for it. I cannot wait to see what comes next. Maybe I spoke too soon.
You want me to help you catch him? Like when X-Men teamed up with Magneto to stop Apocalypse.
I heard that one was bad.
Wasn't great.
X-Men Apocalypse as a movie has a decently promising setup. It's the third in a trilogy of X-Men movies following a good first movie and an even better second movie. Uh-oh. It also happens to include mutants like Angel, Jean Grey, and Storm in prominent roles. Uh-oh. It focuses on a mutant with potentially world-ending psychic abilities as the villain who's working with Magneto and kills off one of the Summer Brothers rather unceremoniously. Uh-oh. It does not have any kind of mutant cure storyline though. That was a close one. It really felt like we were going for a repeat of The Last Stand for a moment there. I did have the right to feel that fear though, considering this was written by the same screenwriter whose name I just can't seem to recall. Huh. But I guess I shouldn't have to worry about that. I mean, can you imagine if they just repeated the same mistakes as X3 a decade later? But Apocalypse is better than that movie at the very least. In fact, when it first started, I was actually kind of enjoying it. Apocalypse's biggest strength is its presentation, i.e. how well what you're seeing on screen is able to hold your attention. One thing that has been pretty consistently entertaining in all of these movies has been the action. The X-Men franchise tends to be very creative and often fairly gnarly with how these mutant powers are used in conjunction with combat, and it makes for some very memorable scenes. The opening scene of this movie is a pretty great example of that, especially since all of the characters involved are fairly disposable, so they're allowed to have pretty creatively brutal moves and deaths. It sets the standards and the stakes pretty high, which may have been the movie's downfall ultimately, but I'll get to that. As far as other good parts, it mostly comes down to performances and other similarly well-presented sequences. We've got the same cast as before, plus some newcomers like Oscar Isaac, Ben Hardy, and Alexandra Shipp, all interacting with each other and being hot, showing off their acting abilities. For the first hour or so, you're watching this mostly talented cast of people bounce off of each other, interspersed with cool VFX and action, and it's pretty entertaining. I think one of my favorite plot threads in the first half of this movie was the retelling of Cyclops' origin story, which was definitely needed for everyone who didn't want to watch the masterpiece that was Origins. This version is mostly a beat-for-beat remake of that, but one that takes full advantage of this movie's 1983 setting and introduces possibly my favorite character in the entire movie, this random-ass jock high school bully.
I know you're in here. Are you crying? I haven't even kicked your ass yet.
I kid a little, but this plotline is kinda cute. With Scott being introduced to the world of the X-Men in this very 80s introduction tour that even culminates in a literal meet-cute between Scott and this new Jean Grey, knocked down books and all. The bullies even make it over to this sequence as well. Dude, you're at the Xavier Institute. Why are any of you calling anyone a freak as an insult? This is like Freak Central. Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique is still pretty good. I still hate her design, and she's a lot better in Days of Future Past, but she's still a hell of a lot more of a character in this movie than she is in most of the others, so you know, that's a plus. Hank is back again, and is very interestingly not blue again.
This is my brother Scott. Hey Scott. I'm Hank McCoy, I'm one of the teachers here.
Really? Because with the age range we're looking at with these actors, you could very easily pass for one of the students. History repeats itself once again. Though this train of thought does bring up a good point. This movie takes place in 1983, 20 years after First Class. I don't know about you, but these people do not look like they've aged 20 years. Alex/Havoc and Scott are brothers that look the same age, yet considering that Havoc was a young adult in First Class and Scott is in high school in this movie, there's an age gap of at least 20 years. Which, ignoring the physical aging discrepancy for a moment, why the hell would the same set of parents have two kids 20 years apart? Also, why does...
You know what I'm gonna say.
Who are you? But, you know what? Sure. I can ignore the timeline stuff for a bit. We're having fun. I feel weird not acknowledging it, but who cares? Scott and friends just went and saw Return of the Jedi, that's fun. And they're debating about which Star Wars movie is the best, so you know, some things never change.
I'm just saying, Empire is still the best. It's the most complex, the most sophisticated. Wasn't afraid to have a dark ending.
Yeah, but come on, if it wasn't for the first one, you wouldn't have any of the rest of the movies.
Well, at least we can all agree the third one's always the worst.
I love your confidence. For your sake, I hope you're right. But the most important scene, at least to me, is the one that comes after. Because of some plot-related element or other, the X-Mansion ends up blowing up with everyone inside. But almost no one dies, because as time slows down, we get the greatest return in the history of cinema. Hell yeah, motherfuckers. And this, of course, heralds by far the best scene in the entire movie. The extraction. This scene is so awesome. Utterly stake-breaking, of course, but awesome nonetheless. I have seen it so many times, it never gets old. It's especially impressive from a filmmaking standpoint. This scene took an extensive amount of pre-visualization, and they spent a month and a half shooting it, with Evan Peters specifically spending 17 days alone on this scene. And all that effort clearly paid off, because this is easily the most memorable scene in the film. It's inspiring as a filmmaker, and it makes you think about who possibly could have been inspired. What was that? Oh no. Well, I suppose this has been a long time coming. Remember when I said at the beginning of this video that the most that I had seen of these movies was the last 40 minutes of Days of Future Past? Well, I wasn't being 100% honest with you. Before this project, I had seen 40 minutes of Days of Future Past and the 2 Quicksilver slow-mo scenes. In fact, I had seen them many times because I found them when I was 13 and watched them over and over and over again, and I became obsessed with recreating those scenes. So I watched a bunch of VFX tutorials to try and recreate all of those moments while editing on an iPad that had LumaFusion installed. I even dragged my poor brother into it My poor prepubescent brother.
What's this?
After this, I got into more visual effects work and found a bunch of filmmaking and editing channels that led me down a rabbit hole, to the point that I wanted to make my own superhero movies. So I guess in a way, this scene from X-Men Apocalypse got me into screenwriting. So that's pretty cool. You should watch my show, The Auteur. Watch it now. It's on Cable 8. Watch it. Heartwarming story and coolness factor aside, this scene is almost too good to be true, because it kind of breaks the movie a little. As I said, it's utterly stake-breaking. Completely overshadows the major character death that occurred moments before. Oh yeah, Havoc died in the explosion before Quicksilver arrived, by the way. And it kind of makes every situation where Quicksilver is involved and doesn't immediately save everyone kind of ridiculous. Hell, it makes the scene where Apocalypse breaks Quicksilver's leg a bit laughable. It also, ironically enough, heralds the back half of the movie where things start to go downhill. So I think it's my cue to start talking about the things in this movie that I thought weren't great. Which honestly was most of the movie.
And wherever he ruled, eventually it would end in disaster. Cataclysm. Some kind of apocalypse.
There's no fucking way that's real. What are we, some kind of X-Men apocalypse? That's such a bad line. It's also kind of familiar in a way I can't quite put my finger on. It'll come to me. Ultimately, while Apocalypse is entertaining for most of its runtime, it begins to fall apart when you start to examine the story, characters, themes, you know, small stuff like that. Like essentially every other movie in this franchise so far, Apocalypse takes its old cast and adds a host of new characters. It's basically a time-honored tradition, and I respect them for it. However, and I don't know if this was intentional or just a side effect of how many X-Men characters they've burned through already, but almost every new member of the X-Men in this movie is a version of a character already previously portrayed in the original trilogy. Cyclops, Jean Grey, Nightcrawler, Angel, Storm, and even Jubilee, who has remained consistent as a background character that is never part of the main story. In fact, the only mutants that I can think of that are being adapted for the first time in this movie are Cyclops and Apocalypse himself. It seems like the goal of this movie was just to bring a bunch of iconic characters from the previous movies that we don't already have so we can put them into a big ol' X-Men team-up lineup shot for the trailer. As for how these characters are actually implemented, I don't have a lot to say. I mean, a side effect of these characters being so haphazardly shoved into the story is that there isn't a lot of time to develop them as actual characters. Scott is the one who gets the most to work with because we see his origin story and then his brother dies, but after that, his development just kind of stops. Jean has basically nothing except for one interesting scene that we'll get to. Angel's just straight up a different character, not in any kind of interesting way, but in just a way that makes no sense for the timeline, which I'm ignoring. I'm ignoring that. I promise. I'm not talking about the timeline. Storm is just nothing. And as for Nightcrawler, I don't like this Nightcrawler. You know, I effed with the previous Kurt. He had his quirks and he seemed a little scary, but he was someone I could get along with, you know? But this guy, oh, I hate this guy. Everything from his stupid face to his red jacket to his 2012 emo-ass hair is just infuriating to me. He acts like such a wet blanket in this movie. It's not endearing, it's just annoying. This is one of the most puntable motherfuckers I have seen in a long time. Not even his cute little finger number joke can save him.
1, 3, 1, 2.
Dumbass can't even remember how many fingers he has. You can count on your thumb too, idiot. The new character, other than Psylocke, who gets some cool action moments but ultimately doesn't really matter, is of course the titular Apocalypse, portrayed by Oscar Isaac. Now, Apocalypse is not a character I'm familiar with in X-Men lore, and after watching this movie, I'm still not really familiar with him. So much effort is put into making him look intimidating and cool and have him being performed well, and while some of it works, I for one am always a sucker for the ancient Egyptian aesthetic, and this line read,
"You can fire your arrows from the Tower of Babel, but you can never strike gold!"
Unironically kinda goes hard. Oh hey, it's Stan Lee. It's never really very effective at making me care about this character. He's a very, very generic, I want to end the world just because type of villain. And I don't even get the benefit of it being Oscar Isaac because of all this makeup and this whispery voice.
I'm here for you.
Hot take, guys, but Apocalypse, not Oscar Isaac's sexiest role. And no, it doesn't help his metaphorical hotness that he was being tortured by the literal heat from that nightmare of a costume.
I didn't know when I said yes
that was what was going to be happening, that I was going to be encased in glue and latex and in a 40-pound suit, that I had to wear a cooling mechanism at all times. I couldn't really move my head ever. You know, I was like, oh, I get to work with these like great actors that I like so much, but I couldn't even see them because I couldn't move my head, and I had to like sit on a specially designed saddle because that's the only thing I could really sit on. And then I would be rolled into a cooling tent in between takes. And so I just wouldn't ever talk to anybody, and I was just gonna be sitting, and I couldn't really move, and like sweating inside the mask and the helmet. And then I was also in high heels inside of a boot, so that was very difficult to move at all. And every time I moved, it was just like rubbers and plastic squeaking, so everything I said had to be dubbed later as well. And then getting it off was the worst part, because they just had to kind of like scrape it off for hours and hours. So that was X-Men Apocalypse.
Amazing how after that experience, he went on to play 2 more Marvel characters, and even another Marvel character associated with ancient Egypt. Just a unique enough acting experience, I guess. As for characters that were carried over from the previous 2 movies, like I said, Raven's fine, I guess. Charles doesn't really do anything besides be a damsel in distress like that other Better movie. Although there is this really funny moment where Apocalypse tries to steal Charles's body, and the process of transmitting himself psychically somehow causes all of Charles's hair to fall out, thereby giving the thoroughly needed explanation for why he's bald. I can't make this shit up, man. Why does this, of all things, need to be explained? I don't know about you guys, but I just assumed that Charles was bald because of, you know, aging. Like how most men lose their hair over time. I don't think this was the question that desperately needed to be answered by the movie that can't even bother to keep track of how old the characters are. It's just like the thing with Rogue's white hair in the first movie, which also happens in this movie with Storm. We don't need explanations for why people's hair is like that. People just have weird hair. It's the thing. And man, Eric just gets it rough this movie. Michael Fassbender is of course acting his ass off in this role. And to be fair, there is this pretty cool scene where he kills a bunch of police officers with a rocket. However, the thing about that scene is that it comes right after his wife and daughter are both fridged, when one of the officers is distracted and shoots both of them with one arrow.
Double kill.
It's so ridiculous that it pulled me completely out of the scene when I saw it. I was invested before that, and when Eric meets Apocalypse, oh boy. First of all, I'll give the filmmakers some credit. They have balls to include a scene where Oscar Isaac, dressed up in eggplant cosplay, tells Magneto to tear down Auschwitz. I can't say whether that was a good choice or not, but it's certainly a bold one. More importantly though, Eric just kind of becomes Apocalypse's lackey after this. Like, really, Eric? You're just gonna destroy the Earth's magnetic core just because he said it'd be a good idea? Like, it's not even something that he knows will help mutants in some way, it's literally just for Apocalypse's self-interest. He essentially just does whatever Apocalypse says until his inevitable return to the side of the good in the finale, which I'll get to in a sec. Now, that's most of the main characters, and that's all of the notable characters who are credited, but there's still one more person of note. An extended, uncredited cameo in the back half of this movie. During the scene where Jean, Scott, and Blue Gerard Way are breaking the rest of the cast out of Stryker's lair. Oh yeah, Stryker's in this movie, by the way. It's for a subplot that's pretty tacked on and ultimately adds nothing to the story, so I'll just leave it at that. They hear some commotion and come across some guards being slashed, bloody, something awful, and a discussion of an experiment that's escaped. Oh no. They're not gonna shove in who I think they're gonna show. Yeah, okay. Alright, I'm ignoring timeline stuff for the sake of my own sanity, but even ignoring that, what does this add? So far, we've literally not had a movie without Wolverine in this franchise, including this bit in Deadpool where Wade magically turns into him. I don't know how he did that. It's just him. I don't think he has that mutant power. He just transformed. The Wolverine may have made me like him, but that does not mean that he needs to be in every single movie. Especially not to further the weird Logan X Jean BS that I thought we were done with. Dude, she's like 16. I didn't know I could dislike this ship even more, but we've found new depths. Ugh. Speaking of Jean, the one other notable moment she has in this movie is the finale. So let's talk about that. As much as we can, anyway, because it's fairly standard. There's a kind of cool scene where Apocalypse hangs out in Charles's mind, and that's when the hair gets melted off in the greatest scene of all time. Eric also regains his sense of morality and fights with the X-Men, giving us this genuinely pretty cool imagery of the 2 support beams making an X. Nice. But that's not how Apocalypse is defeated, oh no. The only way they could think to fight this self-described god was with a god in the machine. You get it? Because that's what Deus Ex Machina translates to. Whatever, I wrote a comedy show, okay? You do not have any right to. The ex machina in question shows up when Jean gets a bit of a power-up and... Oh, that's not a good sign. We don't have time to dwell on it though, because Apocalypse gets Ark of the Covenanted by Jean. Honestly, the biggest break in continuity in this franchise is that his pants don't stay intact during this part. The wrap-up is kind of whatever. Charles gives Moira her memories of him back after 20 years so they can be together, so hopefully she doesn't just disappear in the next movie. The big ol' lineup shot happens, finally. Could have been earlier, I think. Those costumes are pretty cool though, I'll give them that. I can't wait to see them in the next movie. And there's a post-credit scene that hints towards SX Corp and Mr. Sinister. Can't wait to see how that's followed up on. Apocalypse is disappointing in more ways than one. Not only does it break the winning streak we've been on for these movies, but it also breaks its own winning streak where it was fun and entertaining in the first half. However, it's ultimately just issues that were already there being slowly laid bare in the last half. Apocalypse has fun moments and presentations, but its actual substance is fairly mediocre, with confusing and contradicting character writing and serious structural issues. A friend of mine remarked that while this is technically longer than Days of Future Past's theatrical cut, it still feels like more happens in that movie, and I feel like that best describes the issues with this film. It isn't terrible, but ultimately it doesn't really accomplish anything for this franchise or the story. 5 out of 10, could be worse, but could be a lot better. Alright, what's next? Oh, it's a movie all about Wolverine. I did have a little bit of a rant about him in this section, but I did like the last Wolverine-centric movie, and I've heard good things about this one. Probably won't really change my mind about the character, but it's worth a shot. Wow me. Huh. Yeah, you wowed me. Good work. Yeah, okay, I'll admit, I was a little bit more than skeptical going into this one. I've seen this movie praised to high heaven for years and years, and I'm always just a little bit suspicious of movies that get that high of praise. I've also detailed my opinions about Hugh Jackman's Wolverine at length, so you do not need me to get into that again. But James Mangold's work on the Wolverine gave me some confidence that this could be good, and I was willing to be proven wrong. And I am happy to report that I was so wrong, you guys. Oh my god. Logan feels like a movie that was plucked out of an entirely different franchise altogether. It's a more grounded and mature version of a superhero story, but in a way that's actually mature and not just insecure.
Yellow spandex?
The story that it tells is one about hope in the face of overwhelming exhaustion. It's also the first theatrical R-rated Wolverine movie, and it wants you to know that. I mean, this is literally the first line out of Logan's mouth. No way to better establish the rating than that. This first scene is a good setup for the rest of the movie as well. Not only does it establish the R rating through some good old-fashioned swearing and some creative violence. Side note, this scene really does highlight how deadly Wolverine is able to be when he's creative with it. It really makes you notice how much time he spends slicing off robot arms and cutting through doors and other X-Men media. But it sets up the tone and plot for this story as well. Logan is a movie that feels exhausting in the best possible way. It's trying to convey how tired this Wolverine is. After spending so much time with metal bones shoved into his body, his healing factor is starting to waver in the face of the unrelenting assault of the apparently pretty toxic adamantium implants, causing him to age relatively rapidly and generally just slow down. This is well established in the first scene when his claws don't come out all the way right away. Some kind of impotence joke or something, I don't know.
Oh, whiskey dick of the claws. It's quite common in Wolverines over 40.
All of this gives the opening scene, and by extension the movie, a very resigned feel, with even the title card not having that much fanfare. Logan isn't the only character in this movie who feels like they're aging either. The other primary legacy character in this movie is Charles Xavier, who we're used to seeing as this well put together, eloquent authority figure, even if that eloquence and authoritativeness hid a more manipulative part of his character. Point is, he was always in control of the situation, and always had at least some control over his life. In this movie though, that's not really the case, for the simple reason that he got old. Charles in this movie is in his 90s and has developed a form of dementia that makes it so that he not only loses control of his mind and his body, but also his very powerful mutant abilities. There are several sequences in this movie where he loses control and has a superpowered seizure, freezing everyone within an extended radius except for Logan, who can resist his powers somewhat. These scenes are harrowing and showcase how much you can accomplish with very simple filmmaking techniques like shaking a camera and then artificially stabilizing the footage. That combined with the sound design makes it so you can really easily imagine the level of pain that these sequences are causing the characters. The Charles stuff also hits pretty hard because it's heavily implied that he killed most of the X-Men in one of these telepathic seizures a year before the movie even started. I've always had a fear of mind-destroying diseases like dementia or Alzheimer's or Huntington's disease, and a big part of that fear is that I would hurt people who I care about without realizing what I was doing. Now, I don't really have a good reason to fear those diseases. None of my grandparents had those diseases, and none of my extended family did, as far as I know. But seeing Charles like this called to mind those fears in a way that made me connect and understand Charles in a way I hadn't before. It made me upset when he remembered and felt remorse for the deaths of the X-Men that he caused without his control. And then when he was murdered by X-24 shortly after. I got a little teary-eyed when they buried him, I won't lie. But it's not just legacy X-Men characters who feel old in this movie. While stylistically this movie takes a lot of cues from westerns, Logan is set in the year 2029. A year so distant that we're actually closer to it now than we are the release date of this movie. Awesome, cheers for that. I suppose this means that this qualifies as a dystopian future, but it less so feels like the over-the-top, authoritarian, or hyper-capitalist societies you'd see in your 1984s or your cyberpunk 2027s, or your Blade Runners, or what have you. It's more like this is just a world that's kind of gone to shit a bit. There's obvious stuff like there not being mutants anymore for unspecified and unknown reasons. But there's also things like automated carrier trucks and how the farmer guy talks about everyone drinking corn syrup to feel better and everything being a tad more grungy and run down than it should be. It kind of just feels like our world, but a little bit worse. Which I guess is kind of depressing, but that's this movie for you. There aren't a lot of new notable cast members, but a few do stand out. Stephen Merchant plays a version of Caliban, who apparently showed up in Apocalypse as well. I don't know, this movie's too good for me to care about timeline shenanigans right now. Who's really fun, and probably the closest thing that this movie has to a comic relief character.
And I'm pretty sure you don't want to talk about the fact that you can't read the label on that bottle. It says ibuprofen. That was my favorite mug.
I love you, Wheatley. He's got a bit of plotline where the villain, played by Richard E. Grant, kidnaps him and forces him to track Logan down, but he sacrifices himself to save Logan, so it's fine. R.I.P. Caliban. I guess this is how you got to the good place. Speaking of Richard E. Grant, he makes for a great villain. He's not super present throughout the movie, but when he's there, he gives us a chilling villain who's not scenery chewing, but still gives a little bit of the ick with his eugenics-y plan to sterilize all the mutants out in the wild and then breed what's left of them into child soldiers. From this, we get X-24, a clone of Logan who I know probably isn't actually meant to be like this, but to me feels like a representation of the things about Hugh Jackman's Wolverine that I don't like in these movies. This seemingly unstoppable, overly macho, and violent killing machine. All he's missing is a Jean Grey clone to be his love interest and then for him to stab. So I won't lie, it was a little cathartic to see Laura shoot him through the head with a Chekhov's adamantium bullet. Speaking of Laura, look at me, aren't I so good at segues? Her presence adds a layer to this movie that I think is the thing that makes it work. Because so far I've talked about the old and exhausted parts of this story, the characters who are on their last leg. But there's another element here, an element represented by Laura, the world that comes after. Laura is a clone of Logan, a product of the previously mentioned Mutant Children's Weapons program, and she's definitely her father's daughter. That's so cute, she's just like her dad. Holy shit, is that a toe claw? Brings new meaning to the term ingrown toenail, I guess. That was gross, I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, while Laura is rough and tumble and has all the trappings of a true brawler, just like her old man Logan, eh? Doing a terrible pun won't make people forget about the bad joke I did just a couple seconds ago, will it? She's also a force of optimism. Part of the reason she's so driven in her fighting style is her insistence on getting to Eden and starting a new life for the survivors of the Weapon X program. She pushes for this new world even after Logan becomes convinced that it doesn't exist. She is a reminder for Logan that even as old things die and fall apart, that's to make room for the new. And that's what we should be fighting for. Daphne Keane gives such an excellent performance in her debut role, going toe-to-toe with acting legends Jackman and Stewart at the age of 11 at the time of filming. And she's younger than me, great. That's not allowed. She's good on The Acolyte too, if you're watching that. Sure looking forward to the comments on this video now that I've mentioned that show. Should be fun. Logan isn't 100% perfect. It's got a limited budget that you can really feel stretched sometimes, and the pacing's all over the place, especially in the final act. However, it's hard to find much else to really criticize about it. It knows what it wants to do, and it succeeds in its goal. Killing Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. And I just can't fault it for that. Okay, you didn't need to go and do all that. Jeez, I'm not supposed to feel emotion for the character I criticize? That's not allowed. Oh, come on, now you're playing the Johnny Cash song? Do you want me to cry? Because you're succeeding. Fuck you, 10 out of 10. Oh, okay, you've got me back on board, X-Men. I just need something to pick me up a little bit after this general downer. Well, that's certainly one way to do it. So, Deadpool 2. The name is kind of self-explanatory. Now, this is by no means the first sequel in the franchise. Obviously, this wouldn't even be a franchise if there weren't sequels to begin with. But it is a lot more of a traditional sequel than most of the movies here. It hasn't got a fancy subtitle, it's just trying to be Deadpool, but bigger and better. As for whether or not they succeeded, well, let's just dive into it. Now, in many ways, this movie is a step up from the previous one. It's quite a bit funnier, for one.
Black Tom Cuss. White Wade Wilson. What's your superpower? Cultural appropriation?
It seems like the writing team was a lot more confident in their ability to take risks and explore different avenues for bits. There's an extended sequence in the middle of this movie that's filled with exorbitant cameos that is pretty much just a build up to a giant anticlimax joke. It's great. They also play around with the format in neat little ways, like when the team is fighting the Juggernaut, not that Juggernaut, it's a different guy, I'm not gonna get into it. And he's so unstoppable that even the choral score is impressed. Speaking of wacky timelines, there's a cameo in this movie from all of the other X-Men in the reboot movies where they just exclude Deadpool from their movie quietly. Even if the time periods don't quite match up, it just makes it feel like there's no place Deadpool can't go. Even the end credits scene where Deadpool goes and kills the Origins version of Deadpool really adds to this nothing is off limits feel that gives this movie a fun edge. The action is also, in my opinion, vastly improved from the first one. There's a lot of great fight scenes in the first one, but it felt a little cheap in a way that wasn't as charming as it thought it was. The first movie's limited budget made it feel like a lot of the action was a bit weightless and fake, even if it was directly meant to be stylized. This movie's action, however, feels a lot more tactile and grounded, even if it still has a lot of those stylistically unreal moments. Especially with Domino, though those feel more intentional. The opening sequence set to Dolly Parton's 9 to 5 felt very James Gunn, which was pretty cool. It's also really funny to me that this scene just has this guy running in slow motion while Deadpool attacks all of the other people at normal speed. This upgrade in action set pieces can probably be attributed to the change in directors. Tim Miller is not a bad director based off what I've seen of his work in the first movie, but David Leitch directed Bullet Train and fucking John Wick. The dude knows how to direct action, let him cook. The characters are pretty good still. The new additions like Domino, Cable, and my goat Peter give this well-established group a new flavor. Domino is such a fun character, especially because she's so on board with everything happening and rolls with the Deadpool-esque punches pretty well. Zazie Beetz is a great actress, and I hope that if she has a role in another superhero property, it's a role that people have very normal reactions to. Josh Brolin also makes for a great portrayal of Cable, one who's genuinely pretty cool and intimidating when he wants to be, and at the same time slides pretty naturally into the comedic rhythm of the group when he joins the party.
Give me your best shot, One-Eyed Willie.
Oh my god, a Goonies reference. Now that's a great 80s movie that you can never mention the name of in a modern context. Russell isn't super charismatic or anything, but Julian Dennison gives a solid performance for what is the most straightforwardly compelling storyline in the movie. Plus, he's got a good dynamic with Deadpool.
Stay back or Justin Bieber dies.
Justin Bieber, he called you Justin Bieber.
Oh, hold on, wait.
Say what you will, but Deadpool is better at de-escalation than the average cop. Yukio is also fun, despite not being at all the same Yukio from the Wolverine. I'm not bitter about that. I'm mostly just trying not to think about it because I really want to heed the mysterious stranger's advice. While the new characters really work, the returning side characters also mostly hold their own. Dopinder, Blind Owl, Negasonic Teenage Warhead, and especially Colossus retain their charm from the first movie. Colossus in particular I think really rounds out the cast, and adds a kind of wholesome charm as a guy who just genuinely cares about Wade's well-being. I don't think these movies would be the same without him. The only real exception to the side cast winning streak is, of course, TJ Miller, who aside from being a rather slimy and erratic person IRL, is just not funny, and is kind of the gaping sore spot in both this and the last movie. He's just never been very charming or effective as a comedian for me, so I'm glad he's not returning for Deadpool and Wolverine, which is only because he thinks it's a cash grab and definitely not because of anything else. Deadpool himself is at his best performance-wise. It's very easy to misuse Ryan Reynolds and let his shtick become very tired very quickly, but these movies never really cross that line in my opinion, partially because, as I mentioned, they temper it with a certain amount of sincerity. Reynolds absolutely delivers that sincerity, and it makes it clear that a lot of his sense of humor is him coping through the grief of what happens with Vanessa early on in the movie, and that part is really good. Thing is though, the rest of that plotline is kind of and this is where the issues of the movie start to pile up for me. While the movie improves a lot on things like comedy and action, it kind of flubs the story writing a bit. Deadpool 2 has a lot of moving parts to it, with 4 to 5 storylines happening at any given time and the added benefit of time travel being thrown into the mix. This doesn't necessarily make the movie hard to follow, but it does make it a bit more of an effort to keep track of what's happening in a movie that's supposed to be a lot more relaxed. Some of the most sincere emotional stuff is a bit undercut by the writing issues too. For instance, Vanessa's death in this movie, while a solid motivator for the character development journey that Wade goes on, is textbook fridging, which is a bit hard to ignore despite how well the two actors sell it. The ending scene where Deadpool dies also drags on for way past its welcome and strips a lot of the gravitas they're going for with it, and it rings a little bit hollow when Wade is inevitably brought back to life. And while the post-credit scene is funny, it makes this problem worse by bringing Vanessa back to life and reversing a lot of the growth that Wade had in this movie. It feels a bit like the writers wanted to have their cake and eat it too. Now, I still quite like this movie. I think that the performances and the charm of the things I talked about make it really hold up as an entertaining action comedy flick, but its writing choices robbed it of some of the emotional punch that the first movie surprised me with, which is a bit disappointing and definitely tempers my enjoyment. But even taking that into consideration, this movie is still a lot of fun, and I think a worthy sequel to the original, even if it's a tad unevenly footed. 7.5 to 8 out of 10. For some reason, Disney Plus recommended I watch Spidey and His Amazing Friends after this. Interesting demographic matching. This isn't the end of the story for Deadpool 2, however. I've tried to stay away from alternate cuts of these movies because frankly, this script is already the minimum length of a master's thesis and I've still got 2 movies to go, but they are a not irrelevant feature of this franchise. The Wolverine has an R-rated cut, Days of Future Past apparently has something called the Rogue Cut, which adds some new scenes and changes some stuff around, and Deadpool 2 has something called the Super Duper Cut, which is unrated and has some additional footage. I have not watched any of those for this video, though I probably will at some point because those are all movies I like. I have, however, watched the other alternate cut of Deadpool 2. Once Upon a Deadpool, the PG-13 cut that had a theatrical release in December of 2018. As for how I watched it, I just found it lying around. Go on, get out of here. Once Upon a Deadpool is only really remarkable because its existence is pretty funny to me. Apparently Fox really pushed Reynolds, Leach & Co. to produce a PG-13 cut of Deadpool 2 because they could recoup some lost profits in places like China. Reynolds only agreed to do so if they could give it a new framing device. One where Deadpool is sitting, reading the story of Deadpool 2 in a recreation of the bedroom framing device from The Princess Bride, complete with a kidnapped Fred Savage providing some really based commentary.
Wait a minute. You fridged Vanessa?
Fridged, I don't know what that means.
It's a comic book trope in which the wife or the girlfriend of the hero dies in order to further said hero's motivation or story.
Well, that sounds misogynistic.
Yeah. It reduces the woman to a plot device, existing in the film for no other reason than to serve as a source of pain for the hero.
That's exactly what I'm saying. This guy gets it. This framing device has a lot of great moments, though my personal favorite is the fact that the book that Deadpool is reading from is labeled the King James Edition. However, you're probably better off just trying to find a YouTube compilation of all the Fred Savage scenes rather than actually watching this alternate cut, because as to be expected, it's kind of just a worse version of Deadpool 2 otherwise. Obviously, the removal of the more violent stuff and the worse of the cursing kind of takes away the edge that make these movies really fun, but more importantly, it's just so clear that this movie's not built to have those removed. Jokes are ADR'd and lose their punchlines, action scenes are all haphazardly re-edited and lose all sense of rhythm, and sometimes even entire scenes are removed. How can you call this movie the same movie without Deadpool doing drag in a strip club? Exactly. It doesn't help that I just watched the original cut and all of the absences and changes really stood out like a sore thumb. Minus a few alternate cuts and some new scenes that were kind of fun, I was mostly just sitting around waiting for the Fred Savage bits to come back. In fact, so that you don't have to do this, I'll have included a link to a compilation of these scenes that I'll upload on my second channel. I've got no monetization there, and I've already got a copyright strike on that channel because when James Somerton came back from the dead, he manually claimed my video about him, so I'm not worried about getting a copyright claim. Hey there, I'm still editing the video right now, but I tried uploading that compilation of the scenes from Once Upon a Deadpool onto my second channel, but it still got blocked worldwide no matter what I tried to do with it. So instead, it's going to be a link on my Patreon page. It's not going to be behind a paywall. It's going to be a post that's free for everyone to see. It's just that the native video player there isn't going to block it worldwide. It's fair use, so it should be fine. But yeah, if you still want to watch that, it's still linked in the description. But yeah, just want to let you know about that. Back to the main review. Anyway, Once Upon a Deadpool is fun in concept, but kind of whatever in execution minus its framing device. You're better off just watching Deadpool 2 instead. It is nice that they donated a portion of ticket sales to charity though. 5.5 out of 10. You know, I feel a lot better about these movies. We had a minor misstep with Apocalypse, but minus that, this was actually a pretty solid run. Not perfect, but enjoyable and entertaining nonetheless. If this keeps up, we could actually end on a high note, despite the lows we've faced, and where's that ominous music coming from? No. Come on. Oh, we were doing so well. Fine, I guess we're doing this. X-Men Dark Phoenix is... Maybe it's easier to give a little background first. Dark Phoenix had the misfortune of being the first and only mainline X-Men feature whose production encompassed the Disney and Fox merger. So it started production as a 20th Century Fox film and ended production as a Disney film. It also didn't help that during production, the originally slated director, Bryan Singer, was fired for what are very understandable reasons. This was a good move on the studio's parts. I give thumbs up to them firing Bryan Singer. They should have done that, and they did that. But it also meant that the role of director was now open, and presumably because the studio didn't want to shop around for a new director, they just gave it to the screenwriter, a man by the name of Simon Kinberg. It was filmed in 2017, but spent over a year in post-production and was delayed constantly, in order to not compete with films like Alita Battle Angel and The Nutcracker and the Four Realms. Remember that movie? Yeah, me neither. Dark Phoenix also faced some internal weirdness. Apparently a lot of the story was changed around because the initial plot of shape-shifting aliens was seemingly too similar to Disney's other currently releasing superhero movie, Captain Marvel. So that wasn't changed necessarily, but definitely played down in the edit. There was also the decision to market the movie as X-Men Dark Phoenix internationally, but in the US only market it as Dark Phoenix. I have no idea why they did that. Maybe it's like to try and separate from Disney's plan with Marvel and the X-Men or something. But it sets the tone for how odd and confusing the actual movie is. As for said movie, well, I'll talk about what I liked first. Right, that seems only fair. Michael Fassbender is always as great as Magneto. He's not in this movie for very long, but when he is, he's really giving it his all and selling the character. He gets some cool action moments in the finale and is kind of nice as a distraction. James McAvoy does the absolute best job he can with the material he's given, and Charles is kind of compelling as a more antagonistic force here. Sometimes. There are some parts of this movie that are slightly better than when they initially tried to adapt the Dark Phoenix storyline in X3. Scott and Jean's relationship here is probably the best it's ever been in any of these movies, though that's really not a high bar, and it's still really forgettable here. This movie also doesn't make the Phoenix an explicit caricature of DID, which is nice, but I don't know how much credit I want to give them for that because Kinberg still wanted it to be a metaphor for D&D and schizophrenia and had Sophie Turner doing research on those conditions for the role. Great, we're off to such a good start here. Sorry, this is supposed to be me talking about good things. Dazzler's in this for about 2 seconds. I don't know, that's cool. I'm really trying here, guys. Alright, let's just get into it. To be blunt, Dark Phoenix is very bad. It's so bad, it's kind of difficult to even know where to begin. The first scene isn't actually all that bad. We see Jean's backstory, where her powers first come into play and she kills her mom by causing a car crash. God, can you imagine your last words being about a radio song dispute?
Can you change your station?
The song's over, honey.
You said that just sounds like...
Things start to go downhill pretty quickly after that, though. Something that I really haven't mentioned so far is that all of the mainline X-Men films have had these cool animated title sequences to start the movie off with. They weren't groundbreaking or anything, but they gave these movies a neat little bookend to tie them all together. Dark Phoenix doesn't have that. It just has this plain little title card. A neat little metaphor for how this movie drains all the life out of this franchise. The first major set piece of this movie is when the X-Men go on a mission to save the crew of a space shuttle. A story beat that would have really worked in a 60s setting instead of a 90s one, but whatever. What can you do? This set piece also feels weird because it's in the context of the President of the United States calling Charles Xavier on the phone to help with this mission, and then the X-Men are surrounded by a cheering crowd on their way to said mission. The reason that this set piece bothers me so much is that aren't the X-Men mutants? Hasn't the conceit of this entire goddamn franchise been that the X-Men are a safe haven for this class of people who are otherwise hated and feared by the rest of the world? Why is the President of the United States calling them on their phone like they're the Avengers? It's something that theoretically could have been built up from the ending of Days of Future Past, but obviously it wasn't. There was a whole movie in the middle where a group of rogue mutants tried to end the world. It just feels so weirdly dissonant, especially when an offhanded comment in a news report later in the movie confirms that Jean Grey's Phoenix antics caused the government to start rounding up mutants into camps. That was a pretty fucking quick about face, wasn't it? Why can't we just stay consistent with the status quo established in this universe already? Also, those suits look so bland, especially compared to the unique ending suits from Apocalypse. Raven's hair and makeup also look really cheap, not to keep harping on the costume design. Anyways, this set piece is so oddly paced. When I'm watching it, it feels like it's supposed to be tense and thrilling, but I'm just not invested enough to be enjoying myself. There's a lot of action that technically should feel big and bombastic with what it's doing, but it's shot so boringly and without any sense of tension, to the point that when Jean absorbs the Phoenix Force and explodes the ship, it doesn't result in any feelings in me. Which is weird. It's hard for me to not get at least somewhat invested in movies, even bad ones. We do get this moment with Quicksilver though. Be right back. Oh shit. You like that? Because that's the most amount of action we get out of him in the movie. Remember how he was the best part of Apocalypse? Yeah, why bring that back? We've got to make time for the Not Scrolls. They're technically called the Dabari, but they're so unimportant to the story outside of the one played by Jessica Chastain that I'm just not gonna mention them again for the rest of the video. I just wanted to point out that they looked like Groot. The weird pacing quickly becomes a problem because of how slow it makes everything feel. This movie is actually a lot shorter than the other reboot movies, clocking in at just under 2 hours, but because of its pacing, it feels like it drags on for much longer. This isn't even really something that can be fixed with a tight edit, it's just a problem with how most of these scenes are directed. Conversations just plod along, action is sluggish, and even things like explosions feel like they're happening in slight slow motion. It doesn't help when half the cast feels like they don't want to be there anymore. You know, most of these actors' contracts expired in Apocalypse, and so they had to sign new ones to appear in this one. It's really funny learning that, because the feeling I get watching some of these actors deliver their lines is not unlike watching disinterested college students give oral presentations that they put a crumb of effort into. Although I can't say I blame them when they have to deliver lines like this.
Did you hear what the kids are calling you?
Do I want to know?
Yeah. Phoenix. It's cool, right? You know, bird that rises from the dead.
Great job, guys. And of course, the most infamous bad line in this movie is one that has been memed for years.
And by the way, the women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to X-Women.
This line is fascinating to me for multiple reasons. Ignoring how clunky and almost like a parody of progressivism that someone like Ben Shapiro would dream up it is, it's just not a line that relates at all to the conversation that was being held. The conversation that Raven and Charles were having was about how Charles was being irresponsible with the students he was using as soldiers. It's just such an out of left field thing to say. I can just imagine Kinberg writing this scene and then coming up with this zinger at a completely different time and just shoving it into this scene. With how much Lawrence clearly hated saying that line, it's almost a mercy that Raven was killed off halfway into the movie. All the more efficient to be used as fridge bait for Hank. Speaking of Hank, he's human again. He's human again. Every single goddamn movie it happens. Jesus fuck. Something else that really bothers me about this movie, everyone's a fucking idiot. Charles, of course, is an idiot, but I guess that's okay because he's an idiot in a way that's in character for him. So Eric, meanwhile, does such obviously idiotic things like telling this group of people fleeing from Jean to jump into the helicopter she is actively controlling with her mind. What are you doing? This, of course, is followed by a scene where Jean is shocked and surprised that the mutants of Genosha, this is supposed to be Genosha, by the way, this little camp. Anyway, Jean is shocked and surprised that the mutants of Genosha want her to leave after she drives a helicopter into their homes in an attempt to kill a whole bunch of people. I know she's not supposed to be thinking very clearly right now, but the Phoenix Force didn't make her stupid, did it? And that's another thing, Jean is really not a compelling protagonist in this movie in the slightest. Maybe this is an issue of her not really being a character in the last movie, but if we can make a compelling movie about fucking Puss in Boots, I don't think it's unrealistic to expect the main character of a 2-hour movie to be well developed. But because Jean gets possessed by the magic space ghost 5 minutes into the movie, the most we really spend with her as an actual character is when she's a child. That's really not enough for me to know or care who this character is. And with all due respect to Sophie Turner, I'm sure she's a lovely person and she seemed really committed to this role, but she really did not sell this. It's not even a matter of her being a bad actor or anything. From what I've seen of her work on Game of Thrones, she can act. Based on her small role in Do Revenge, she's also a great comedic actor, which, let me tell you, is harder than it looks.
I don't do cocaine! I don't even know what it looks like. I don't know what it looks like!
Point is, she can really perform when she's not saddled with material like this.
You're wrong. My emotions make me strong.
I am begging you, please just be a little less cliche. I really don't want to recount the story of this movie because it's mostly just a series of dumb events that barely relate to each other, but I do want to talk about the finale a little bit. The finale of this movie sees all the X-Men trapped on a train after they were taken into custody by military agents. I don't know what branch of the military these guys are, but they do have patches on their arms that say MCU. I could be watching an MCU movie right now, like Guardians of the Galaxy, but instead I'm watching Dark Phoenix, because I thought it would be fun. Anyway, there's this big old fight between the alien guys. Hey, I actually did mention them. And the X-Men, and it's just not entertaining. By this point, I was so bored that I was paying more attention to the dust floating around the air than I was the actual movie. There were a few moments that stood out to me though. I like this bit where one of the attackers is shot and then heals immediately in a way that's supposed to be intimidating and then is almost immediately shot dead. There's also a moment where this demon child sees this random soldier get killed and then screams like he just watched his childhood best friend get gunned down in the street. That's not the only odd connection we have though. Eric and this bald mutant lady, who I can't be bothered to learn the name of, seemingly had this meaningful moment. And then almost immediately she's yanked off screen by an unseen enemy and thrown to her death. The character writing and filmmaking in this movie are truly unparalleled. But the absolute cherry on top of this movie's finale is when Jean goes full Phoenix mode and crashes the train, creating this apocalyptic final battle arena that is really reminiscent of the final battle in X3. Why are you trying to evoke that movie's imagery? Isn't the whole point of this exercise to try and be better than it? I swear to God, I am losing my fucking mind. Okay, calm down. I can do this. I can, at the very least, finish this movie. So Jean takes the Jessica Chastain alien lady into the sky and explodes her and herself, neutralizing the two biggest threats to the X-Men in this movie besides Simon Kinberg. We cut to some time later, and the Xavier Institute is now the Jean Grey School for Gifted Youngsters. Sure, whatever. Beast is now in charge because Charles has retired to France, where he meets Eric to play some chess. The movie ends on an homage to the very first movie that started it all, when Charles and Eric played chess as old men. How nice. That movie takes place 8 years later than this one, by the way. It's kinda weird, right? Because the implication is supposed to be that it only takes 8 years for this guy to age into this guy. Now, I know there are some differences in timelines because of Days of Future Past, but I don't think that Wolverine preventing an assassination changes the fucking rate that people age. And I know we're not thinking about the timeline too much, but Mystique dying 8 years before her first canonical appearance is quite the maneuver. You know what? No, I'm not holding back anymore. If I'm gonna do this at any point, it should be now. Let's finally talk about this godforsaken timeline. Should be simple enough. It's a bit confusing, but it probably won't take that long to figure out. Welcome back, everyone. Please, pull up a chair. You're in for a hell of a ride. So, the timeline for the X-Men movies. I kept thinking about it, and the more I thought about it, the more problems I ran into. And before I get any comments about it, please just automatically assume that I took the time travel and timeline shenanigans from Days of Future Past into account with this. Trust me, I thought about it. So let's talk about First Class to start off with. There seems to be a lot of people forgetting their relationships with each other, doesn't there? In First Class, we learned that Raven was the adoptive sister of Charles, and she remains a pretty important figure in all of those movies, the prequel movies. Kind of an odd thing for neither of them to even acknowledge in the original trilogy, right? Especially considering that Raven seems to have aged a lot better than Charles. An oddly similar story seems to take place between Logan and Sabretooth. In X-Men Origins Wolverine, we learn that Logan and Victor Creed, aka Sabretooth, grew up together and considered each other brothers. Creed is the villain of X-Men Origins Wolverine and does a lot of vile shit to Logan. But when they meet up again in X-Men, neither of them mention it, and Sabretooth just unceremoniously dies. It's bizarre. Also, what's the deal with Emma Frost? In First Class, which takes place in 1962, may I remind you, we see Emma as a full-grown woman. However, in Origins, which takes place in 1979, we see her as a teenager. How does this make sense? Did she just move backward in time once she grew up? But fine, whatever. She's a minor character at best. But it's a pretty recurring problem for a character to be in the wrong time period multiple times over. Oh, this apple juice has definitely gone sour. Take, for example, Angel. In The Last Stand, Angel is shown to be a young man in 2006, and 10 years beforehand, in 1996, he is a small child. So why the hell is he a young adult in Apocalypse, which takes place in 1983? I know that we're technically in the timeline that Wolverine intervened in, but it didn't change when people were born, did it? Because this Angel would have had to have been born before 1973, which is when Logan traveled back in time and interfered. Main characters aren't safe from this either. I've already discussed the 20-year age difference between Alex and Scott Summers, which, despite said age difference, they somehow look the same age. But what I haven't pointed out, and you may have already guessed, is that we see two different versions of a young Scott Summers. One in Apocalypse and one in Origins. And not only that, we also see Scott's mutant backstory in both films, twice in two different time periods. It's wild how it almost plays out exactly the same too, once in 1979 and once in 1983. But what's wild is that that's still significantly less of an age gap than between him and his brother. And while we're talking about Origins, let's talk about how Charles, with his terrifying CGI face, is up and walking. This, to be fair, is in line with his portrayal in The Last Stand, where he was also up and walking. But not in line with the fact that he was paralyzed in First Class. And I know that he can walk in Days of Future Past, but the drug that allows him to do that also takes away his mutant powers. And we see Charles using his mutant powers both in Origins and in X3. Also, Eric is in the X3 backstory, despite neither of them being on speaking terms at this point. Or how about the fact that Charles said that he and Eric met when they were 17, when they actually met in First Class, which would have been a lot later. Because ignoring the fact that they're obviously not teenagers, because apparently we can't trust physical age signifiers, Charles is a college professor. Or the fact that he said that Eric helped him build Cerebro, which was a key plot point in X2, clearly isn't true because Beast helped him build it. It just gets worse and worse. If Logan's adamantium claws were cut off in the Wolverine and replaced by his bone claws, why the hell does he have adamantium claws again in Days of Future Past in the future timeline? There is no excuse for this one, guys. These movies came out back to back. There was an end credit scene in the Wolverine leading into Days of Future Past. I just can't take it. In the ending of Days of Future Past, Logan is saved by Mystique, disguised as Stryker. But then in Apocalypse, he's under the jurisdiction of the real Stryker again. How did that happen? Did she sell him out? Why are there 3 dystopian futures in these movies? Why are aliens randomly introduced in Dark Phoenix? When? How? Why? 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 think I understand. There is no answer. It's all just a jumbled mess that one can't hope to make sense of. The real question isn't how the timeline works, it's why is it like this? But I was so blind to that fact all along. I was so distracted. I have to fix it. I have to fix it. I have to make it so that I never find myself worrying about this timeline. And if there's anything that these movies have taught me, it's that the only way to do that is with more time travel. I'm going to do it Deadpool 2 style though, that seems a lot more manageable. Alright, my closet has a lot of stuff in it. Not me anymore, but it does have a lot of things I think could help. So it'll probably have enough machinery to find something to make a makeshift time machine. So, let's take a look, shall we? Ah. Oh. Very thematically appropriate. I also had a actual working time machine in the form of a time turner, but I don't know, it feels like it has weird implications now. Anyway, let's get to work. I think it's time. Well, I mean, it's always time when you've got a time machine. I understand it now. I understand what the vision was. It was all me. Well, at this point, it seems like the only thing left to do is fulfill time's promise. It's go time. Man, I love a good "it was me from the future all along" type of twist. Although I suppose I probably would have figured it out sooner if I had remembered what my winter coat looked like. Anyway, Dark Phoenix. What a shit show, am I right? I wasn't expecting a lot from it because I knew its reputation, but somehow it didn't even meet those expectations. It's just a complete mess, and not even a fun one at that. At least Origins was a bit funny and ridiculous in a way that made it kind of entertaining at times. This was just a boring slog. 1 out of 10. It doesn't even have a mid-credit scene for me to look at. I just have to watch the actual credits. Man, fuck you, Simon Kinberg. Wait. Simon Kinberg. I swear I've heard that name before. Hold on. He was the writer and director for this movie, but he was also the screenwriter for Days of Future Past, wasn't he? He did a good job there, but that's not what I'm thinking of. Wait, hold on. He was the screenwriter for Apocalypse, right? That's honestly not a great track record. Having 2 of your 3 writing credits for this franchise be 2 of the worst movies is pretty iffy. But hey, it could be worse. It's not like he wrote... Oh my god. Hold on. Me too. It was him all along. He wrote Dark Phoenix. He wrote Apocalypse. And worst of all, he wrote X-Men: The Last Stand. That's right, this guy. The guy who wrote Dark Phoenix, a movie that was supposed to be a do-over for The Last Stand, was the guy responsible for The Last Stand in the first place. He told a story badly, and then 13 years later, he turned around and retold the same story worse. How was this allowed to happen? Why was he allowed to do this? There's something else too. There's something I'm missing. My mind keeps coming back to Apocalypse. In particular, the one really bad title drop line read.
some kind of apocalypse.
Why is that line so familiar? It's like I've heard it before. Like another line in another bad superhero project. Something like...
Gotta say, it's fantastic.
Say that again?
It's fantastic.
Yes, it is. Guys, I got it.
No. 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 There's no way. Hold on, I need to check something. Simon Kinberg wrote Fantastic. How is this man still allowed to walk the streets? You look at every single facet of the Fox Marvel brand and where it all went wrong, and he's always there. Apocalypse, X3, Dark Phoenix, or, well, I guess Origins isn't his fault. That was just kind of a freak of nature. I don't know if anyone could really have predicted that. But now we've got Fantastic to add to his list of sins. His crimes can't be buried, we can't allow him to continue. For the love of all that is holy, we must stop Kinberg before he strikes again. Close your windows, lock your doors, invest in gold. You have to do everything you can before he... Hi there, it's me. I've decided to take a much needed break and allow myself to actually sleep and have a shower. So now I'm feeling much better. I feel as though we can continue with the video now, especially now that I've watched all the movies. So now that I'm done with all that, we can... What? What do you mean there's still one more?
The other is all things evil, fear, shame, and self-destruction.
Oh, right. This one's just sad, honestly. The New Mutants is a weird movie. It takes place in... It was supposed to be during the 80s, apparently, but now I have no idea due to how much the script changed during and after filming. Probably for the best. I don't need to think about these movies' timelines anymore, and the movie doesn't really need help being weird and confusing. One of the things that stands out to me about the New Mutants is that you can really feel it trying to tell a story, and kind of succeeding, but only just barely. The narrative actually starts out pretty strong, with an intriguing backstory and decent setup for the rest of the movie. Danny, our protagonist, sees her father murdered and her home destroyed by some mysterious force. Then she ends up at this weird facility with 4 other teenagers and a woman called Dr. Reyes. This is a setup that I quite like. The characters aren't really all that likable apart from Rain, played by Maisie Williams. Roberto, yes, that Roberto, is kind of a creep.
Drugs, I bet. Or an info, maybe? Hopefully.
Sam is just kind of quiet, and Ileana, Anya Taylor-Joy's character, is just the worst. Not in a typical mean girl kind of way, either. Danny is Native American, and Ileana just takes that as an opportunity to be really fucking racist.
And garden. Don't know how to grow weed, do you?
No.
What kind of Indian are you?
And it's not a one-off, it happens constantly.
Aww, this isn't the hospital, Pocahontas. Hey, Standing Rock. You want a buffalo wing? You people love buffalo, don't you?
What are we doing here, guys? Why are we laying it on so thick? All this does is make the eventual attempt to redeem her fall flat. I do like Rain, though. She's not super well developed, but she's sweet, and her romance with Danny is also sweet, as well as being easily the best part of the movie. They're very cute together. It's just wild that this is the first same-sex kiss in a film series as gay as X-Men. It's almost a crime. However, other than that, there's just really not a lot to unpack. For one thing, you can really tell that this movie was originally intended to be R-rated. I got vivid Once Upon a Deadpool flashbacks with all of these weirdly cropped close-ups of this very bloodied up Dr. Reyes, and with how many sharp cuts we get away from action scenes and more grotesque dream sequences. It's like actively pushing against the bars of its own cage. The story is really poorly paced too, and sometimes there are just weird editing choices. One that sticks out to me is when there's this lie detector sequence with building tension between the characters, but just before the tension reaches its climax, the scene just kind of ends. There are so many other scenes like this, and it really starts to add up. This hour-and-a-half long movie feels like it's had a whole hour cut out of the middle, because we have basically nothing happen for the first hour, and then in the last half hour we jump straight to the third act. So much stuff gets lost in the shuffle that we lose really important plot details, like what the hell is that CGI demon bear doing there? I know it has something to do with Danny's powers, that was something I was able to piece together towards the end, but it feels like there's a scene or two missing that actually explains what the hell is going on. I'm not someone you always need to explain plots in great detail to, otherwise they don't make sense, but this was just confusing. Also, amazing that this small-scale horror X-teen drama movie still managed to have a big CGI sludge fest in the finale. This really is a Marvel movie. While we're talking about villains, Dr. Reyes makes no sense. There's one moment with her that really got me because it's just so silly. Let me walk you through this. Reyes is given the order by her superiors to kill Danny. So her plan is to 1. Strap Danny to a table. 2. Monologue about rabid dogs and putting them down with a body bag in view for Danny to see and freak out. 3. Knock Danny out with a gas. 4. Attach an IV to Danny. And 5. Then, and only then, poison the IV. I feel like it would have been so much easier to just do steps 1 and 5 and then skip over all of that. I know about suspension of disbelief and all, and villains don't need to be 100% logical, but come on, it's almost like she wants her to escape. We don't learn a lot about Dr. Reyes, but we do learn that she's working for Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister. Seemingly, this is what the end credit scene of Apocalypse was leading up to, which is lent more credence by the fact that there was apparently a cut John Hamm cameo where he played Sinister. However, with how long it took to make this movie, it seems to have just been forgotten outside of a background detail in Deadpool 2. What made this plot twist in the movie even weirder, though, was when we got this revelation, we see intercuts of footage used in Logan of mutant kids being experimented on, which really took me out of the movie because it just kind of seems a bit lazy. It makes sense with the story of how the movie got made, though. The production of the New Mutants is a long and sad tale, but it can probably be most accurately summed up as the most unlucky movie production in the world. It's a story that's honestly more interesting than the story of the movie itself. This article by The Vulture gives a much more in-depth description of the ill-fated production of this movie, but I'll try to summarize the most interesting sections here. The New Mutants started as the passion project of Josh Boone, the director of The Fault in Our Stars, and Nate Lee, Boone's childhood best friend. It was pitched as the first in a trilogy following the Teenage Mutant team, adapting the comic run by Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz. I'm so sorry if I pronounced that wrong. It was picked up by Fox in 2015 and seemingly was in a similar camp to Deadpool, being tonally different from the mainline X-Men films and with a similarly low budget. The pitch was essentially a mixture between horror and John Hughes-esque teenage drama, and it was showing a lot of promise. However, issues started cropping up pretty early on. The script Boone and Lee were working on wasn't living up to Fox's expectations, and had some pretty weird stuff like a version of Storm who was essentially the New Mutants' cruel jail keeper, which was a weird move for such a beloved character. Notes between the studio and Boone kept being traded, and new writers kept being brought in, until Fox got cold feet about the whole idea in 2016 and hired new screenwriters to completely overwrite the script into a straight horror. There apparently, allegedly, was a whole rotation of writers who were working on the script at any given time, who Fox chose not to credit because it would look bad. It's pretty easy to blame this all on corporate meddling, and to a certain extent that was definitely true, but Boone was apparently also pretty hard to work with according to sources at Vulture. The group of writers would try to improve the script by pointing out massive quote-unquote leaps in logic, but Boone wouldn't have any of it.
People would be like, this doesn't make sense, and Josh would try to explain it. Enthusiasm is not an explanation.
Shooting eventually began in 2017, and around the same time, marketing and buzz for the movie started to pick up. Despite the public's interest in it, Fox was losing confidence in the project by the day. And after shooting wrapped in October of 2017, the project kept getting delayed again and again and again, and Fox was considering throwing the whole thing out and starting from scratch, reasoning that it wouldn't be too expensive because of how low the budget was. Things weren't helped by the Disney merger, which threw an already messy production into absolute chaos. Disney wasn't really sure what to make of the messy and extremely dark story that was being told, and essentially just decided to let the production team figure it out on their own, with no extra money for reshoots or anything. Not that that would have helped, considering the cast had all aged significantly in the 2 or so years since filming. Disney essentially left the movie out in the woods to be eaten alive by wolves. Considering all of this, New Mutants was in pretty bad shape, but there was still hope. It had lost a lot of its initial audience interest, but it was still a low-budget, young adult-oriented horror film, and could have still made a decent earning at the box office. However, it was finally completed in early 2020, and was slated for release in summer of that year. You can probably guess how that story ended. It didn't even get the benefit of being dropped the same day on Disney Plus or anything. It was just fully left out to dry. 6 years of work only to go out like that. I think that best summarizes how I feel about this movie. A lot of the issues I have with it suddenly make sense when you learn about this nightmare of a production, and it's why it's so weird to watch. You can practically feel the passion of the original project fighting and straining against what's there to become a better movie. But circumstances, stubbornness, and just plain bad luck meant it never really had a chance. And as the last movie of the Fox X-Men era, it means that this long, winding road of a franchise that left an impact on so many doesn't get to go out on a high note, on its own terms, or even with a bang. It's more like a whimper and a last gasp of dying breath as corporate interests paved over it to make room for the next new thing. And no matter how much you or I might be looking forward to enjoying that new thing, it's still a sad story nonetheless. 4 out of 10. It could have been so much more. And so, here we are. After way too long, I finally watched all of the Fox X-Men movies after nearly 2 decades of having little to no familiarity with them. I've seen the beginning, and now I've seen the end. Because yeah, Deadpool and Wolverine is still coming out, but that's kind of a Disney movie, isn't it? Even the last couple of movies under the X-Men banner that were distributed after the merger still started as Fox projects. So really, it's been over for a while. I must say, watching these movies back to back gave me an understanding and appreciation for them that I wasn't really expecting. While I wasn't as connected to the franchise as so many are, and my opinions vary not only from your own, but I imagine from the general mold. Here's my Letterboxd ranking, by the way, if you were wondering. Follow me on Letterboxd for more super duper uber based takes. I still kind of got it. I feel like it's pretty hard to watch a series with 13 movies like this and not get at least a little bit invested. The X-Men are a vibrant cast of characters who have captured audiences' imaginations for decades. So even if they didn't hold up to the scrutiny of today, even if there were some moments that were pretty awkward, or even if the movies were outright terrible, there was still that spark left, still that magic that latched itself onto me. Truth be told, if these movies were all just terrible, I wouldn't have finished them. And a lot of them are pretty terrible, and trust me, I won't be revisiting those ones anytime soon. But so many had this unique charm to them even when they were losing me. They really were something special. And now, their day is over. But what about the future? What's in store for the X-Men's lives on screen? Well, there's the MCU, I suppose. Deadpool and Wolverine is supposed to take place in the MCU, but I imagine the only major Fox character who will be sticking around is the Merc with a Mouth himself. Hugh Jackman has expressed he's not interested in returning as Wolverine after this, and I can't blame him. Dude's been playing the character for longer than I've been alive. I'd want to be done too. So, the future is uncertain for the live-action incarnations of Marvel's main mutants. But with animation, guys, X-Men 97 is so good. It really shouldn't have been. It's the continuation of a 90s Saturday morning cartoon, one that had a very rigid adherence to the status quo, and was so censored characters weren't even allowed to say kill. And now it's being revived by Disney? But I tell you, I was shocked too. This show not only blows the original incarnation out of the water, not only triumphs over most Marvel Disney Plus projects that have been released in the last 3 years or so, it even, in my opinion, hits highs that the Fox X-Men movies almost never hit. Logan is really the only thing keeping it from being the best X-Men thing altogether that I've seen. Its animation is gorgeous, its character work intricate and engrossing, and its political messaging powerful and not subtle. It's got some rough patches. Season 1 finale is a bit of a misstep in a lot of ways, and the dialogue is rough sometimes. But it's the kind of adaptation that the X-Men have never gotten, and has cemented my status as a fan of this series. I cannot wait for season 2. But putting that aside, what have we learned? Looking back on the journey, all the twists and turns and yellow spandex and new and old mutants, there's one thought that jumps out. One strong conclusion that unifies everything and ties it into a neat little bow. Cosmonaut Variety Hour, you ain't got shit on me. 2 videos about the X-Men movies, both less than 1 hour, and you call that the ultimate review? Yeah, sure. My video being so much longer is definitely a sign of me being smart, and definitely not of me not knowing how to be concise. Take that! Thank you so much for making it to the end of this monster of a video. It was a lot of work, and it's something I am really proud of. Before I go, I wanted to take this opportunity to use my platform to do some good and direct your attention to some organizations who are doing some good work. The Palestine Children's Relief Fund, or PCRF, and Operation Olive Branch are 2 organizations who are trying their best to help provide relief on the ground in Gaza. The PCRF is a larger organization that is trying to do more sweeping reform and rescue work, and Operation Olive Branch puts donors in connection with specific families and individuals who are in need of more immediate help. Just checking them out at the very least would be excellent, and I'll put some links to them in the description and probably in a pinned comment. Other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Get some rest, drink water, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel, especially Pillar of Garbage.
You don't scare me, huge Ackman. Listen, mate, you don't want to fight me, all right? If we go, I will break you. Come on!
What is that? What are you doing?
He's doing his Wolverine thing.
Yeah.
You know? It's better with the claws and no shirt.
Fair.